of that. So maybe you'll have time at the end to bring some of that back in. Maybe thought he was talking to a bunch of dimensional conservative farmers and he didn't want to piss them off or something.
My good father said, know your audience, son.
I got a kick out of the story you told me about, you were asked to preach at a church.
Yeah, so
Maybe
I'll
tell us
start
about
with that. So I was right out of college, first year in practice, and this patient I helped quite a bit because she was pretty excited about what we did. And she's up in Princeton, and so just outside of the Twin Cities. She says, could you come to our church and do a talk on nutrition? I said, sure. What day of the week does that mean? She said, well, Sunday, of course. I said, well, I mean like in the afternoon. She said, no, come in the morning. This odd, it was okay. I'm up there talking and doing my thing. Everything's going great for about an hour until I open it up for questions. And the first question, the guy stood up, he's in bib overalls, obviously. He looked like a farmer. He goes, what do you think about milk? And I sarcastically said, well, it's good for calves. Oh, I got about carried out of that church. If there was tomatoes, I wouldn't have indulged it. So I told my dad that was a long time farmer. Son, you got to know your audience. You just don't talk like that. That's your livelihood.
Fighting word.
Yeah. So I was not invited back. Let's put it that way. Well, we're going to get started here. If you have a question, just interrupt. To a conference on cancer put forth by our scientific group, Institute for Functional Medicine. And it turned out to be a whole discussion about activity in relation to cancer, looking at the causes of cancer largely come from the microbe system in your gut. And they get disrupted, they create bad messages to your immune system. The immune system reacts and develops cancer, basically. So we came out of that kind of freaked out, going, wow. You know, we have over 3 to 5 pounds of microbes that will be in your gut at all times. So that's normal. And if they're the wrong ones, it's a bad deal. If they're the good ones, then they're really happy. So we actually have genes in your body. Every cell has genes. Well, every microbe has their own genes too. So they're constantly communicating what we call the microbiome to the genome of our body. So they play many different essential roles. And almost everybody has, I did a stool analysis on everybody here. You all have a little bit different kind of proportion to a degree. Some of the overlap, but they're all set unique environments based upon the food you eat, your emotional set of feelings and experiences you've grown up with, the daily lifestyle choices and so forth, all influence your genes, your gut. Remind me of a study back 10 years ago where they took college kids, they paid them money to do these studies, sign up for $50, and they'll do anything for $50. So they measured their stool samples, and they measured types of bacteria that are in stool. Then they had to listen to classical, Beethoven, and Bach music. They measured their stool samples. And they found that certain levels were like healthy bacteria, probiotics, and not very many bad ones. Then they turned around, they had to listen to heavy metal, hard rock rap music, just headbanger music as I call it.
Rap music.
Yeah, there we go. And within 2 hours, in the same people, when they took stool samples, all the pathogenic bacteria showed up, like Salmonella and Klebsiella and all these nasty bugs that didn't show up before, now showed up. What it was demonstrating was what the effect of stress has on your digestive microbes. They don't like stress. So that was an easy measurable system to influence stress on the gut bugs. So back to the study here with chronic fatigue syndrome. Fatigue is the #1 complaint of all patients who come to a doctor. That's the most common, frequent symptom. So when you looked at these people, they have cognitive problems, they don't sleep very well, they get headaches. And they found that 40% of these people report anxiety and depression. They have other symptoms like lightheadedness, dizziness, appetite changes, shortness of breath, very common symptoms. And they found that half of these people met the diagnostic criteria of irritable bowel syndrome. So what they did is they gave them 3 servings of probiotics, about 24 billion of lactobacillus. And they found out that in the control group, they stayed pretty low level, about 37%. But in the treatment group, it went up double to 73% in terms of the number of bacteria. And what was more exciting, that's an obvious thing, you give them bacteria, they're going to go up, right? Well, what they found out was that the anxiety was significantly improved just by giving them 24 billion probiotics, showing the relationship between the gut and the brain. So in the last 6 weeks alone, I've had 18 new patients, but the primary complaint is I'm anxious. I want to get off this anti-anxiety drug. Anxiety is like on the rise, and so it's not just about being stressed. There's a lot of reasons for anxiety, and this is one reason, is not having the right kind of bugs in your stomach. So even very small doses of bugs, microbes in the gut, interact with the surface cells of the gut digestive lining to interact with these different names of brain centers. These centers regulate hormones, they regulate your memory, they regulate your emotional state, and all these major 3 regions regulate anxiety and mood. So very small levels, we're talking minuscule levels, influence your state of mind. And that's just a chart showing the brain and the spinal cord, called the sympathetic, which kind of revs things up. On the other side, you have the parasympathetic, which kind of slows things down. So you have 2 different systems, like a brake and a gas pedal. And your heart rate can go up or it can go down. And then these control systems called sympathetic, parasympathetic are directly interacting with your digestive microbes. And that just shows you an example where down here you have digestive microbes interacting at the surface of the brush border lining of the intestinal tract. And you can see here the nerves come right from the vagus nerve off the brainstem right down to the stomach lining. That's one nerve all the way from here to there, and there's millions of them. So it's not just a theoretical concept. It's anatomically, that's just the way it is. So when you have unhealthy bacteria such as Clostridia, Clostridia can be life-threatening. You can get a condition called Clostridia difficile. It's severe diarrhea. You're hospitalized and you could make it or not. It also shows up in healthy people when we do samples. It's just like harboring kind of in on the side. It's like, well, it's kind of scary to think that you actually have these bugs in hiding, but they can be just there. Well, in children with autism, they're very high, and they create inflammation along the gut, and it activates these brain centers to the point where they become anxious and very irritable, and their mind can't think very clearly. Well, there are some bacteria like probiotics, like Lactobacillus plantarum, they can compete with
unhealthy microbes at the gut level. So it's about a kind of a shoving match between good versus bad bugs. As I mentioned, these good bugs can actually elevate mood. Here's a study showing that they elevated levels of depression compared to control groups. And this was measured in 132 different people. What's really interesting is that when you actually give probiotics, it's not just about bugs. You actually can make better fatty acids or good fats in your brain. So your brain cells become enriched with omega-3 fatty acids when you give bifidobacteria in the intestinal tract. It seems rather odd, but that's just how the body reacts. And then likewise, when you take lactating goats and you give them lactobacillus, they get higher levels of omega-6 and omega-3 healthy fats. And also in humans, lactating women, when you give them lactobacillus, rhamnosus, GG, and bifidobacteria, it also increases another omega-3 fatty acid called gamma-linolenic acid, or alpha, excuse me. So that's in breast milk. So just by giving probiotics, you can make the rest of the body healthier in terms of good fat balance. I'd like to spend a few minutes about a concept called leaky gut. Is that a new term for anybody here? Wow, you guys are really on track. So leaky gut is an early marker that precedes the onset of autoimmune disease. And autoimmune disease can be a variety of things, from thyroid to skin to joints to brain, digestive problems. A lot of different diseases are where your body is kind of attacking itself, called autoimmune. But they're finding that leaky gut starts the whole process. And one of the top experts in the world is Dr. Alessio Fasano. He's a digestive specialist. And he has found that the autoimmune process can be stopped if the interaction between genes and environment triggers is prevented by reestablishing your gut barrier function, or this leaky gut.
So what causes leaky? I mean, leaky gut is
Yep.
what it is, and then
Yeah, we're going to get into that. We're going to discuss what causes leaky gut here in a second and show you some pictures. This neurologist is a fellow faculty member for my teaching team. We travel around the country. There's 35 of us. And Dr. David Perlmutter, he wrote a book called Grain Brain. You may have seen it it's a bestseller these days, and where he's describing that the ingestion of grains, which we've been told for 30-some years that whole grains are good for you, right? Well, on a neurology level, like, say, Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's and various other advanced problems, they're identifying that they may not be as healthy as we think they are because they're so high in sugar and starches. And he states here that the big exposure to the environment is the actual lining of our intestines, not our lungs, not our skin. And we're dependent upon these microbes, the bacteria living in the gut, to maintain our health. Why am I showing you a picture of a tennis court? Well, that's the surface area, 2,100 square feet, of your intestinal tract. Your small intestine has that much exposure to foods and microbes every day. So that's a pretty big area. Just showing the upper, middle, and lower intestinal regions, and moving into the colon itself, where most of the microbes are located. And that's just an up-close view of the small intestine, showing the surface area of these called villi. And a graphical representation of these finger-like projections. That's why there's such a high surface area, because you have these undulations and valleys and hills. Under a microscope, you can see one villi, or this green area. These are one layer cell thick, and there's a blood vessel down to the middle, and your immune system is right here. That's your immune system. So 65 to 75% of your body's immune system is in the intestinal lining itself. So what you drink, eat, and what you populate for your gut influences your immune system, which affects the rest of your body. So in a normal intestinal tract, it looks good like this, these little hills and valley called villi. And when they get infiltrated with your immune system that attacks the tissue, it gets filled in and you lose your surface area. And that's just more of a graphical representation of what I just said. So normal over here to what's called celiac disease, where you lose your villi and it gets flattened out. On a picture level, that's what it looks like, where you get these singed areas, and you lose your barrier right there, normal barrier on abnormal barrier. And that looks like the villi up close. Kind of looks like shag carpeting, right? Well, that's normal. That's Berber carpeting, like this stuff right here. That's the change, what happens when you get severe leaky gut and when your immune system attacks the tissue. So what happens is that there's normally these proteins that keep your cells tight together. So the bugs are out here, your food's out here, and they're going to be absorbed through the cell. When these tight junction proteins get released, they open the gates, and then the food particles, such here, they're demonstrating a gluten fragment from a wheat, rye, or barley, opens the gates. So what causes leakiness on one part is gluten itself. When the gluten activates the immune system here underneath the gut lining, there's about 8 different kinds of immune cells that start talking to each other, and they start saying, I need some help, and they start sending messages, and they send one cell up here to the surface just to attack it and say, stop it. We don't want this leakiness, so we're going to just shut you down. And then these other little dots, these represent what are called inflammatory cytokines, or chemicals that go throughout your whole body. And that's when people start having, say, joint pain or headaches, I'm tired. It could be any kind of symptom, really, because these chemicals go everywhere, including your brain. So it all begins in your gut. We'll come back to that leaky gut in a second. This is what a bacteria looks like in the intestinal tract under a microscope. It's got these little projections, and they're called lipopolysaccharide. They're fat sugar molecules, abbreviated LPS. What happens when these bacteria die, which they do all day long, all night long, they have a chunk that breaks off, and it's this LPS. And normally these 100 trillion, there's about 1,000 milligrams at all times, and that's just normal. We all have that. The problem is when it gets too high, it activates your immune system to the point of toxicity. So back to our leaky gut, Dr. Persano says there's only 2 things that we know of that cause leaky gut. LPS from these bacteria and gluten. That's it. I would probably throw in there alcohol. If you're hitting the sauce pretty hard, that would probably create a lot of leakiness. It's like throwing gas in the fire. Or high levels of stress, really high. They've measured military, frontline military people, and they find a lot of leakiness because it's just life and death. But it's mostly for most humans and animals, it's LPS and gluten. So they're the 2 bad guys. So to discuss this a little further with the bacteria, these LPS molecules cause your immune system to react through a mechanism called molecular mimicry. What that means is your body is kind of confused between what's good and what's bad. So it attacks the LPS, but it also attacks healthy tissue. And it's very similar what happens is the LPS molecules kind of look like brain tissue. They look like nerve tissue in your fingers. These neurons or brain nerve tissue has a similar lipid structure as these bacteria fractions called LPS. This triggers inflammation. This triggers a complete cascade of problems in the body. When it gets really bad, that's when people end up in the hospital and they require massive amounts of antibiotics to save their life. That's called septic shock. That's not what I'm talking about. We're talking low-grade toxemia that all of us typically have at one point in our life, most of our life. Well, it turns out there's a study just released here that was kind of alarming, and showing that the body has this molecular mimicking or reacting to when you're eating gluten grains, it attacks the back of the brain called the cerebellum. So it's attacking brain tissue when it's thinking that it's wheat products. Milk, the body is attacking milk antibodies. It's also attacking your myelin sheath, which is like the insulation around electrical wire. All your nerve cells have myelin sheath. So this cross-reactivity is what we call it, is now coming to the forefront, showing that maybe something is what we thought was really healthy, like gluten and milk products, may not be the best foods if you have an autoimmune problem where your body's not real healthy. So we're testing all of our patients, most of them, for cross-reactivity now. And we find about 3 out of 4 people fail the test. We can measure antibodies to milk and wheat, and we can also measure antibodies to cerebellum and nerve proteins, and we're finding there's a overlap there. So it's most healthy people don't have any problems with this, but people who are on the edge, it's getting to be a real serious problem. And that's just a review of what I just said, showing that there are certain antibodies and peptides for brain tissue and other nerves that are cross-reacting with food proteins. So, as an example, what you can do about that, they took animals and they gave them this LPS in higher levels, and they measured liver enzymes that became too high, and they measured other markers that were called oxidation markers. And they found that when they gave them curcumin, which is a plant derived from a root called turmeric, you may have heard of that before. Turmeric is a plant mostly from Asia, and now it's grown here in the United States in some selected areas, mostly as a nutritional supplement. And when you eat Indian food, it's kind of orange and colored. That's curry dishes. That's turmeric is one of the main ingredients. Well, they found out that when they gave these animals curcumin, that it blocked inflammatory messages in the immune system to the point where they didn't have any inflammation, and completely shut down their inflammatory response. And greatly, and most importantly, there's a protein called glutathione. Glutathione is like your mother antioxidant in your body. If you lose your glutathione status, you basically die. We have to have glutathione at all peak levels throughout your life. And we do things such as stress, and we eat and drink certain things, or we get exposed to pollutants. They all stress your glutathione. Well, when you can restore glutathione with something as simple as just a few pills of curcumin, it's kind of a big deal. So I use a lot of this product in my practice. We use a lot of turmeric extract. You can buy it over the counter at any health food store in the United States. It's readily available. And the key with curcumin, as I'm talking about it, it's all about absorption. So you need to have some kind of healthy fat inside the product, either from the manufacturer or take it with a little bit of oil to get it better absorbed. Because in traditional Indian cooking, they use butter fat. First they throw the turmeric and their spices and they get it going, and then they throw their onions in, and then they throw their meat and their vegetables and so forth. Well, that's how they've been doing this for centuries over there. It's well absorbed into their body, and that's one reason why they don't have a lot of Alzheimer's disease in that country, is because they eat a lot of curry dishes. It's just part of their culture. They've measured this because of this ingredient called curcumin. So this is just an example of one thing you can do to help not just your digestive bacteria, but also the rest of your body. Showing the relationship of bad bacteria, leaky gut, and chronic fatigue. That's all that really is telling us. So your body can result in low energy by having the wrong kind of bugs and a leakiness in the gut. When you have a leaky gut, you can get a leaky brain. The same cells that kind of keep your cells tight together in your gut, called tight junction proteins, they're also in the brain lining between your blood and your brain. We call it the blood-brain barrier. So when you have things like LPS and other kinds of toxins, they cause leakiness in the brain. And then you can basically, you develop what are called neurotoxic effects. There's a condition in advanced dementia and Alzheimer's called amyloid plaquing, where you lose your mind. And one of the theories is that we're getting too much amyloid. Well, it turns out that the more leakage you have in your brain, the more amyloid you get. And there's a lot of things that can actually reverse that. Curcumin is one of those, or turmeric is one of those things. As an example, there is an environmental toxin you probably have heard of called PCBs. They've been around for, well, since we created this back in the 40s and 50s. And they stay in the environment largely, and they just keep recycling. Well, the good news is that probiotics have been shown to influence the removal of these toxins from the digestive tract. So it's not just a hopeless misery concept. So by having a healthy gut, you can get rid of some pollutants that just keep causing problems such as cancers. There's another chemical called bisphenol A. Does everybody know what that is? Okay, bisphenol A, or BPA. It's a commonly found in plastic drinking bottles, and most companies are trying to get away from bisphenol A. When you open a can of, say, a can of tomato juice, there's a plastic lining on the inside of the can. That's bisphenol A. And what they're finding is that this compound is not real healthy for the body. And the chemical industry wants to deny that it's a problem. But what's interesting is that a lot of companies are going away from BPA and they're using other products. We just don't know if these other products are any better. But the market is such that they're capitalizing on this and say, let's make drinking bottles without BPA. Well, BPA causes lots of issues, mostly in developing children, not so much in adults. But BPA is essential. Like, you could not really have a hospital unless you had flexible plastic tubes to shove in your nose and in your arms, and it's part of like our medical system. So there's pros and cons. We've had a lot of benefits from BPA. Well, it turns out that probiotics, such as Bifidobacteria and Lactobacillus, also increase the excretion in the gut feces. So you can remove it from your blood and get it out of the digestive tract. Another reason why to have good probiotics. Some other benefits of good bacteria: they can bind to food carcinogens. So when you fry your burger, like last night I had burgers on my grill. Yes, they were organic, but they're still burger. And when that fat drips down, you get the fire and it chars up the burger, that's what's carcinogenic. That stuff causes cancer. However, and that's the fancy term called heterocyclic amines, Bifidobacteria and Lactobacillus bind to those nasty chemicals in your digestive tract. So the moral of the story is, when you eat fried meat, make sure you got some probiotics with it, or you take them every day, and have some coleslaw or some broccoli, because that helps bind it up and make your body eliminate it better as well. So you don't necessarily have to avoid everything in life that's bad for you. It's just about moderation and kind of being smart about it. When I was first in practice for about 15 years, I thought I knew everything. I was like this smart kid. And I was like, you can't have this, you can't have that, oh, that's toxic, that's carcinogenic. Well, after about 15 years, I realized, well, it's kind of tunnel vision view. It's not how life is. No one's going to be perfect. I'm not perfect. I have pizza now and then. I don't avoid every molecule of gluten in the world, but it's all about being smart as well as you can, and that includes eating meats. It's all about how you prepare it, and as well as what you have in the background, like in this case, such as healthy bacteria. Another thing you can do to help this LPS bacteria compound in the gut is fish oil. Anybody here take fish oils? Okay, a couple people. I'd highly recommend it. It's in my top 3 most common things I recommend to all people. I don't need to even see a person to tell them you should be taking fish oil. There's over 2,000 studies to date on fish oil. It's just incredible studies. Even general healthcare providers, primary care providers, they even know well enough, even if they're not nutrition experts, to know fish oil, yeah, that's pretty good stuff. Yeah, I've heard there's good things for cholesterol and blood fats and so forth. And I could spend 2 hours just talking about fish oil, but here we know that it blunts inflammation and it keeps your toxins out of your body. Yes?
How does that compare to flaxseed?
How does fish oil compare to flaxseed? Flaxseed has a fatty acid called alpha-linolenic acid, ALA. That's converted to what's in fish, EPA and DHA. They're all 3 are omega-3 acids, omega-3 fatty acids. So there's an enzyme that converts what's in flax to what's in fish in your body. So you could not eat fish and just take flaxseed as long as that enzyme is working well. And the problem with that enzyme is it gets sluggish as we get older, and stress, there's a hormone called cortisol that blocks that enzyme. So as long as you don't have high cortisol in your body, it can function pretty good. It also needs magnesium, zinc, vitamin C, and vitamin B3 to work well. So it's again about micronutrients in your body needs to make that enzyme work. Generally, we recommend people to just supplement, 1 to 3 fish oil capsules a day. It's like 1 to 3,000 milligrams, just as a general maintenance dose. That's very safe. We go much, much higher in clinical conditions, but generally that's just fine. Or you can eat fish frequently. The key is the right kind of fish. So wild salmon is probably the safest as far as not having lots of toxins, but have high omega-3 fatty acids. So if you eat fish 2 to 3 days a week, that'll give you quite a few fish oil dosages. So I take fish oil every day, but on days that I'm eating salmon, I probably don't take fish oil, just because that's one less thing I have to take. So sardines are excellent omega-3 fatty acids as well. So they have EPA and DHA, and they're also very high in protein. And what's really incredible about sardines is they contain a molecule called RNA, ribonucleic acid. We have DNA, we have RNA. They both are in your body, like brother-sister molecules. When you actually eat a high RNA food like sardines, it's literally brain food. I can give a person, we've actually done this with a lot of people, a can of sardines, an egg yolk or two, that's not, hard boiled but soft boiled or poached, and some fish oil. Those 3 ingredients, it actually lights up your brain cells by 35%, making new brain cell connections. So the RNA foods goes back into the 1950s. There was a doctor, his name was Frank, Dr. Frank. You can, in a computer search like on Google, the Frank RNA diet, you'll see this guy was into that way back then, 60-some years ago, showing that high RNA foods really can improve health conditions from fatigue to headaches to whatever. So I highly recommend wild salmon and sardines as your 2 main fish.
What about bullheads?
Bullheads, they're probably a good source of protein. I don't think they're really super high in omega-3 fats, but
That's the Iowa walleye.
I grew up on bullhead, so
It's not my favorite fish.
Yeah, I know. Right, I got it. There's also olive oil. One of my favorite topics. Actually, I travel around the country, part of a team. I spend a half an hour just talking on olive oil as one of my points of lecture, and I won't do that tonight. I won't bore you. But here they're showing in animals when they had high LPS that's toxic, that actually caused near death called septic shock. When they gave them olive oil, it lowered these inflammatory chemicals that cause disease, and they had a 60% increased survival rate. That's pretty amazing. And the amount that you can give is about 2 to 3 tablespoons per day, just as a maintenance dose for humans. Almost all the studies use between 25 and 50 milliliters. 50 milliliters is equivalent to about 3.5 tablespoons. So you're not talking massive quantities. We know with olive oil it reduces the risk towards Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and all kinds of neurological issues. It's well known that it reduces the risk towards heart attack and stroke. It reduces cholesterol numbers. It's generally an anti-inflammatory food. You may have heard of the term the Mediterranean diet. It's kind of the new buzzword in medicine, going, oh, the Mediterranean diet is really healthy. Well, people in the Mediterranean basin area, like in Spain and France and so forth, they have basically a higher vegetable intake than we do. They eat less meats, less dairy, more vegetables, more fruits, more nuts and seeds. But they also, when you have a salad in Italy, it's an olive oil salad. It's not just like drizzle with little olive oil. It's like baked, it's just thick in olive oil. They drink this stuff almost. So it's a different way of eating than we eat. So when you go into my kitchen, I have 8 different kinds of olive oils. Why? Well, they all taste differently. Some are really bitter and some are really bland. And we use them liberally because we know the science is there. They're actually showing that the main reason why the Mediterranean diet works is because of what's in olive oil. Not because they're drinking red wine with their meals every night. No, that's not it. That was just kind of an excuse for us to drink red wine. So you want to make sure your olive oil is extra virgin. That's the key, is the first press of the olive. What's going on there is you're getting all the plant extracts, the phytochemicals, the different things that make the olive rich in nutrients. So the controversy is that here in America, in 2009, a group of scientists went on the supermarkets and they pulled off 60 different products of olive oil off the supermarket shelf, and they analyzed it, and they found that over 3/4 of them had soybean oil and canola oil and safflower oil. It was like a mixture of oils, and then just not labeling it and calling it olive oil. So that's starting to get cleaned up a little bit, but if you...
If a person was going to use one, what would be the brand and where would you find it?
Well, unfortunately, the brand of olive oils are not they're not labeled like this is a good oil. It doesn't say. So the industry is trying to get this cleaned up to the point where they're going to list the level of phenols, that's the active ingredient, by numbers like 500, 800. The higher the phenol, the better. Right now they're not labeled, but there's actually, I buy my olive oils right on like say Amazon.com, and they have this new free shipping program for a year. So it's kind of, you pay one fee and you get stuff pre-shipping, so it's great. So there's 3 kinds of olives that have the higher antioxidant content, and they're from Spain, Italy, and Greece. And I can spell them out for you because they're kind of different words, but one's called Picual, P-I-C-Q-U-A-L, and Picual is a type of olive, and these are high antioxidant types of olives. The second one from Italy is called Coratina. It's C-O-R-A-T-I-N-A, Coratina. And the other one is from Greece, and that's called Koroniki. That's with a K. Any of those, you type those into say a search engine, say Amazon, extra virgin olive oil Coratina or extra virgin olive oil Picual, up will come these different brands right there. It does all the work for you, so you don't have to even look for it. And you can just scroll down and you can buy one. I was in Whole Foods yesterday in Minneapolis, and I found one brand that had the Koroniki from Greece right on the label. So it's starting to come forth in stores. But if you go down here to your local store here in town at, I don't know what you have here, Sub Cub or whatever you have, they're not going to tell you what kind of olive is on the label. It's just going to say olive oil. But extra virgin would be your first choice, and then go from there. Also, you can use coconut oil. Coconut oil is also extremely helpful to blunt your bad bacteria called LPS, and it prevents liver damage in animals. And coconut oil has something called medium chain triglycerides, or MCTs. 2/3 of coconut oil is MCT. And 1/4, 25% of clarified butter or butter, ghee is the term they use in India. That's basically they basically put a stick of butter on a stove and heat it until it separates the milk solids from the oil, and they skim off the milk solids, and it's called ghee or clarified butter. Butter contains 25%. So I actually recommend butter as one of the oils I use to my patients. So it was for about 30 years, doctors have been telling patients, oh, don't eat butter, it's bad for you. It's actually quite healthy. It has these good fats, just like coconut oil. Coconut oil had kind of a bad rap for almost 50 years, not because it was bad for you, but back in the 40s and 30s, that's what the bakers used. The problem is it doesn't have, when you bake a pastry with coconut oil, it doesn't have a very long shelf life. Well, when they came out with hydrogenated oils from seeds and so forth, it had a longer shelf life. So now it's kind of back in the vogue of healthy oils is coconut oil. And there's a lot of studies showing it's actually very healthy for you. So this is just basically saying that there's many kinds of autoimmune diseases associated with leaky gut, like diabetes, type 1, celiac, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, which is a skin condition, and an inflammatory condition called Hashimoto's thyroiditis, so it's a thyroid problem, and chronic fatigue itself. But what I want to go to is half of all food intolerant patients, so people who react to a food can have a leaky gut problem. The reason why is that your intestinal tract has your immune system is reacting to the food, so you could have leakiness. People who have migraines and gallstones have a tendency to have leaky gut. My husband is not overweight, he's just big intestine over the fence. I got a weird sense of humor. So a few words about wheat. Wheat contains gluten, which breaks down into different molecules, and it's just basically there's different fractions that we can measure when we do blood testing. And your body is reacting to this stuff right here, where we're reacting to the gluten molecules. Well, it turns out there's many different kinds of gluten-like molecules in grains. So like wheat has this gliadin molecule, barley has something called hordein, rye has one, corn has one, and even one in oats. But it's mostly the wheat, barley, and rye that's the problem, because the corn gluten is not the same gluten that's in wheat. The body deals with it separately. So the problem is, according to these experts, is that we really don't have the digestive enzymes to break down gluten. Did you know that humans have only been eating grains for 6,000 years? It's a relatively new experiment in the evolution of humans. It's estimated that we've been around this planet for 2.3 million years. And the scientists have said, well, we've only been eating this for 6,000 years because that's when agriculture began in the Middle East. And our body has not developed the ability to break down these grains at all. So that's why many people have health problems, and it's only coming to this recent research that's showing that's part of the problem for some people, like many people. So when you have a digestive problem that's typically thought as a digestive problem called celiac disease, you have to have three components. The food coming in, your genetic predisposition, and the immune system reacting to it. So it's a triad, three things. 30% of all Caucasians have the genetic predisposition towards reacting to gluten molecules. We can measure these genes in your blood directly. So it's a big deal, and it's estimated that here in this country, 1 out of 105 people are reacting to gluten, either as celiac, straight up, or gluten intolerance. And it's more than just having an achy stomach or a problem. It actually can cause cancer and death. So it's not something to take light of. So 1 out of 105 people is a very high incidence when we look at disease incidences. It's astronomically high. The way it represents for some people is chronic diarrhea, tiredness, anemia, and weight loss. Those are the typical symptoms. However, 50% of the people have no gut-related symptoms at all. They have things like, say, bone loss. I've got hair loss. I got dental enamel loss, or I get headaches, or I get pins and numbness and tingling in my fingers or my toes. Or I might get recurrent canker sores. As a kid, I had canker sores just terribly. It's like nothing had ever fixed. And now I look back going, well, yeah, I ate gluten 5 times a day. It's just what we did as kids. That's how we lived on the farm. And then when I stopped eating gluten years ago, I had never had a canker sore since. So there's a lot of causes or symptoms that can represent as celiac, which is more advanced levels of gluten intolerance. However, there's other conditions. I've already mentioned a few things here. These are different, more severe conditions, like insulin-dependent diabetes. Diabetes is a top third, 1, 2, 3, the number 3 problem in this country. And they're showing now a relationship between diabetes and celiac disease. And the kicker here is that many people have mild digestive issues like bloating, indigestion, discomfort, but many people have no symptoms whatsoever. None. You don't even know you have celiac disease, and you have no symptoms. That's what's kind of freaky. I diagnose celiac disease every week on people who are completely healthy and normal, like myself. I diagnosed myself years ago. It's like, I don't have any symptoms, but wow, look at my blood test, it's out of control. Some people your body adapts really well. And I'll show you another slide about what happens as we get older.
All the grains, it doesn't matter what grain it is.
Barley, wheat, and rye doesn't matter. Yeah, or spelt, which is more of a older hybrid. So this same expert, Dr. Persano, he did a study here recently. He took 13,000 plus United States subjects. He did an intestinal biopsy and then took blood and measured these antibodies. Found out that they measured first-degree relatives, second-degree relatives. First-degree relative would be like, a brother or a sibling, child. Second-degree would be like a cousin, aunt. Well, they found out that in first-degree relatives, if one person is celiac, 1 out of 22 people, first-degree relatives, also have celiac. Second-degree relatives, 1 out of 39 people are prevalent with celiac disease. And it turns out that much of this begins in the early stages of infant time. If you give a baby gluten in the first 3 months of life, they have a much higher rate of celiac disease development. Is if you wait for even 2 or 3 months, the incidence goes way down because the immune system is still developing. So if you get a little more time, the problem does not progress as much. And here's the interesting fact, is that many times it shows up first in children right away. It's like, well, we got loose stools, there's diarrhea, he's not thriving. Okay, fine, they can diagnose it. But it may not show up until 30, 40 years later. Who would think? 30, 40 years later, all of a sudden, I've been diagnosed with celiac disease. Your body adapted that well. And females have twice as many problems with it as men do. We don't know why, but that's the stats. Here's an interesting study where they took children who are diagnosed with celiac. They put them on a gluten-free diet for 2 to 5 years, and they came back and they rechecked their system for leakiness in the gut, to see if there was still these loss of your villi, and they checked antibodies, and they also measured these oxidation markers called glutathione. And they found that those oxidation markers were still low, which means that the body was on edge, waiting to react at any minute. So even though the gluten wasn't coming in, the system was like on ready alert kind of status. And so it brings to the point where I have almost all of my patients taking some kind of antioxidant to support glutathione. And there's a variety of things, which we'll talk about here in a minute, that can do that. So they're very simple things. When you diagnose gluten problems for the gut and the rest of the body, there is a problem. We have a high rate of false negatives. So if you go down the street to your primary care provider and say, I want to get checked for celiac, they're only going to check for 3 antibodies. And if you don't have all 3, they're saying you're fine. If you have 1 or 2, you're fine, don't worry about it. That's this general status quo of medicine today. In my office, we check 24 different antibodies, different fractions of gluten, and that gives you a much better diagnosis. Well, part of the problem is when you're measuring 40% of the celiac patients create antibodies to a certain fraction of the gluten called alpha and this enzyme, but there's other fractions like gamma and omega, and that's what we're measuring, these other fractions of the gluten molecule. This is just a lab test where you're measuring all 24 fractions. 3 of these on this page are the classic celiac markers you get at any medical doctor's office. If you have enough of these things that are in pink, then we say, you really need to stop eating gluten. So the way this shows up is you can have an allergy to wheat, and you can get the most classic symptoms of a true allergy where you get hives, you can't breathe, you have to go to the hospital and get an injection or get an EpiPen. That's not real common. Most people don't have that, but you can. You can also get a skin eruption where it shows up as blisters and red rash and stuff like that. And you can have straight celiac where I've already mentioned the digestive symptoms and neurological problems. But the most common problem is non-celiac gluten sensitivity, where you have the same symptoms or no symptoms that relate to celiac. Most of us as humans are over here most of the time. That's where most of us sit. And this is greatly minimized by our current medical system. They go, don't worry about it. Does not cause any symptoms. Yeah. Well, it turns out that the new studies show this is just as dangerous as celiac. They're both equally tough. So I mentioned this before about cross-reactivity. As an example, when you have a normal kind of reactivity to a food, you have 3 binding sites as an example here. This is combining, say, to gluten molecule here, antigen. A cross-reactivity is you're getting just 2 of the 3. In this case, is a milk antigen. It's still enough to set off an immune reaction in the body. whereas a non-reaction is where you only have one. Just to give you a view. So you don't have to have a full-blown food allergy, food sensitivity reaction. It could be a partial enough to set off the immune system. So in the same lab that we draw for gluten, we check for these cross-reactivities. These are different names of proteins we can measure in milk. Now you have to understand, I grew up drinking milk. My father spent 50 years of his life promoting milk products in Wisconsin. He was largely responsible for producing the biggest herds in the United States. Not using drugs and chemicals, but he used nutrition. It was kind of way ahead of his time, and he wasn't a nutritionist. He was just high school graduation. He wasn't like this learned scientist, but he learned how to do this nutritionally to make higher milk production. So I was driven in my brain as a youngster to basically to drink a quart of milk a day. So when I got into this, my father's like, son, you're messing with my whole career here. I said, well, the science is showing we got some problems with these cross-reactivities. So it's not like we're going to generalize everybody shouldn't drink milk or eat cheese, but they can be problematic. So the ones that are in red are the cross-reactives, the milk products and the gluten products down here. And that's just a lab test that measures those same things. It's the same laboratory in Arizona. So we can measure what's normal, what's borderline, and what's severe. So in the lab, we look for three things. Leakiness in the gut. We can measure that directly by measuring this LPS and these tight junction proteins. We can measure gluten itself. We measure these cross-reactives. And we also measure these compounds that show up in the urine called organic acids. And organic acids are just metabolites or chemicals produced by yeast and bacteria. And we can measure that in urine levels. So when the good versus bad bugs that get overswung, that we can find imbalances in this urine test. So the solution for some people is just to stop eating gluten. And you have to stop the leak in the gut. The way you do this basically is you stop eating gluten and you stop eating cross-reactive foods short-term or long-term, depending upon the person. And one of the first things we do to treat leaky gut is to give probiotics, healthy bacteria. I have some brands that I prefer because these are the brands that are used in science studies. And these are just two different brands called Metagenics, and this is an over-the-counter one you can find in some stores called Culturelle. You can also go on the internet and find Culturelle. And it has lactobacillus. This has a combination of about 7 different species in this Spectrum product. This one has 2 different species. So you want to give a higher viable probiotic count. I believe I have a slide here coming up on different bacteria later on about what's a good probiotic and what's not.
Does it pay to take more than one, or just find one good one?
We like to rotate our probiotics. So if this one here you could just take continuously, so it's got a variety of species. So you're giving your body a multiple choices. But otherwise, you like to rotate them, so you don't want to stay in the same one all the time.
So what kind of rotations?
Typically, if you have 2 or 3 different products, you can just take every other day, just switch brand, just rotate them out, like take one day, one the other day, just kind of rotate through. Or you can just finish a bottle and then go to the next bottle. You do it that way. A lot of people just make it easier for themselves, so you don't have to figure out what you took yesterday and so forth. So to treat leaky gut, we give certain amino acids called glutamine in higher dosages. And we also give this is a product called NutriChelate. This makes your glutathione levels higher in your body. This is a product I created 7 years ago through a company called Nutridyne. I consult with them. And it contains about 7 different ingredients that make your body makes more glutathione, so it makes it stronger as an antioxidant to fight disease. But it helps improve your gut lining quite a bit. It has things like lipoic acid, cysteine, vitamin B12, activated folic acid, some basic vitamins, vitamin E and selenium and so forth.
Would anybody benefit from that?
It's one of my top 3 things we tell all people to take is NutriChelate, yes. So as a summary slide for this toxic bowel problem is we want to restore the intestine so it's not leaky. So that either means stop gluten if that's the problem, or improve your bacteria flora balance. We often give antimicrobial agents. These are plant extracts. They're just things like garlic is a very good antimicrobial agent that improves the balance between healthy bacteria and yeast. We like to reinoculate healthy bacteria, as I mentioned, using curcumin. There's a lot of brands in the market. I use one that's called Longvita. That's an ingredient source. Drinking green tea is very helpful for your good bacteria. Taking magnesium is very helpful, and zinc is very helpful for keeping your intestinal tract healthy. There's a chemical found in red grapes, which grape juice or red wine, called resveratrol, also improves this LPS. And I mentioned fish oil, coconut oil, and olive oil as examples. Yes?
You mentioned all the fish oils and sardines. What about other types of seafood like oysters, smoked oysters, fresh?
Sure. Questions, oysters and
Lobster.
seafood, lobster.
Well, I wouldn't go that far yet.
I don't have any problem with those. They're actually very high in protein and they're very rich in a mineral called sulfur. They're one of the top foods, highest in sulfur is seafood. Oysters are very high in zinc. So I think in 3 ounces of oysters, or is it 2 ounces? There's like 75 milligrams of zinc, so it's really high, one of the highest there is. It doesn't contain the fish oils, no. It doesn't have the fatty acids, but not the omega-3s, but it's high in protein and sulfur, which has other benefits for primarily eliminating toxins from your body. You need protein, you need sulfur in a major way to remove toxic agents from your system. So the intestine says to the brain, gutsy move for a brain. Okay, we're going to keep going. So if you have other questions or you need to move around, that's fine. Our microflora have many functions. They ferment our dietary fiber just like they do in your soil. They digest things down. And they release healthy fats called short-chain fatty acids. And we're going to talk quite a bit about that. And they also release vitamin K and vitamin B complex. They also feed your intestinal cell lining itself. And when that does that, you actually prevent like colon cancer. So these short-chain fatty acids, which comes from non-digestible fiber, actually makes your intestinal tract anti-cancer, and actually your whole body anti-cancer. And these bacteria, they also provide a resistance or a barrier effect against other toxic microbes. So what we eat really does influence the rest of our body. This is a bacteria eating some cake. You've heard of the saying, we are what we eat. Well, that is true. We are what we eat. So if I eat cake every day and that's all I eat, basically my body's one big cake. And it may not be the best thing. So again, like I said before, it's about balance and moderation. So it's not that you can't have cake. This concept of what's called dysbiosis, which means imbalanced microbe population in your gut, this is not a new concept. This goes back to 1908. This is a scientist back then. He won the Nobel Prize in Medicine. And when he talked about the prolongation of life through these concepts, Dr. Metchnikoff at the Pasteur Institute, which is where they discovered what microbes were back in the 1800s. And to date here, as in 2013, there's 558 articles in Medical Science on this term dysbiosis, and 170 in the past year alone. So it's a very interesting concept. So back in about 1925, doctors who were using the concept of eating, say, yogurt and probiotic-rich foods and using antimicrobial therapy, things to kill off bugs like eating, various plant extracts. And then antibiotics came into the world. What happened in the literature is that this concept of dysbiosis just went away, all because of 2 doctors on the East Coast. It's amusing that they actually had a little connection to the company that created the antibiotics. but they basically stopped all research on dysbiosis. They said, okay, this is not a problem, so don't worry about it. It's just going to go away. Well, for 65 years, it went away, and now it's back full speed. The science is like going, we can't get enough research on this because antibiotics are not curing our problems. Yes, they're needed, but we've ignored this for too many decades. It's back full force. So this is not really a new concept. So these microbes, when they become imbalanced, can cause, as I mentioned, various problems. Skin rashes, headaches, tiredness, arthritis, irritable bowel, peripheral neuropathy, which is pain, numbness, and tingling. It can cause gallstones, colitis, cancers, lymphoma, and all the other things, including MS and obesity and Parkinson's. It's a long, laundry list of problems. Just showing the relationship between things that affect your healthy bugs. So your mode of birth. So babies that are born vaginally have a much higher level of healthy gut bugs than babies that were born with C-sections. They're getting exposed right on the way out. So your age, your diet composition, the level of prebiotics, probiotics, drugs, environment, a lot of factors influence your gut microflora. As you can see here, your large intestine colon has a larger level of bugs, probably not much different than animals, where the backside has a lot higher level in the hindgut. In the small intestine, there's also bacteria, but fewer. You can see fewer dots in the upper bowel than down the lower, because you need these bugs down here to help you digest your food. So basically, it's just you're saying that you cannot live without this. Your genes and your microbes, they work together as a team. It influences how your body develops and metabolizes. And showing that, hey, did you know that weight gain might be related to the bugs in your intestinal tract? It could actually be that simple. There's new studies showing that unhealthy microbes in people who are larger have different microbes than people who are thinner. Well, we're calling these things fat bugs. There's a type of family called Firmicutes that's higher in people who are heavier than people who are leaner with the Bacteroidetes. So is it cause or consequence? We don't really know, but we're seeing the relationship between these two family of bacteria linked to obesity, showing that these types of bugs, they actually extract the calories much better out of food and moves it into fat storage, whereas this other Bacteroidetes, they don't extract as well. And we can actually measure this on a stool sample. We can actually measure them directly. We get an index right here. I don't look for that too often, but it's more kind of a factoid. Like, hey, did you know you got certain kind of bugs? Here's an animal study showing mice that were germ-free. They inoculated them with these certain kind of bugs from larger obese mice. They gain weight versus the lean ones don't. It's interesting. So a different kind of concept of thinking how your bugs are influencing the rest of your body, including weight levels. And it's also showing up in relationship to diabetes and low-grade inflammation. Your blood sugar levels are dictated largely because of your healthy or unhealthy levels of bacteria in your intestinal tract. And your immune system itself is totally responding, good or bad, in respect to the composition of your intestinal microbes. And this is just a chart showing allergens, pollutants, antibiotics, things that influence your microbiota. The net income over here is the outcome. It can be allergy, type 1, MS, inflammatory bowel disease, obesity, heart disease. And over here, you could also be on the other side and have good health, well-being, long living. So it can go 50-50 either way or somewhere in the middle. It's encouraging to see scientists spend some energy in this area versus just looking for the next wonder drug. They're actually starting to look at this going, hey, we have a lot of variables here that can influence our health. So In summary here, you can see that it helps you digest your food, you get vitamins out of it. It actually helps you block the recirculation of hormones. So when you actually have, say as a male testosterone or female estrogen, your liver breaks down hormones all day long, good and bad. So like there's good cholesterol, bad cholesterol, you actually can move in one direction or the other. Same thing with hormones, can go good or bad. And so if you have the wrong kind of diet and bugs, you can lean towards the bad, say estrogen, that increases your risk towards breast cancer. Well, if you have unhealthy microbes, when those hormones come down through the gut, they tend to get recirculated because these bad bugs, they break this chunk of binding these bad hormones to a molecule. They get reabsorbed back up to the liver and has to start the whole process. So the moral of the story is here, if you have healthy bacteria, you can sweep those things your body's trying to get rid of that are unhealthy. That's what this term enterohepatic recirculation means. So causes of this can be what's called SAD. SAD stands for the Standard American Diet. It's not a joke, that's what we call it in science. We basically have a SAD diet. Low fiber, high in fat, and really high in simple sugars. And sometimes broad spectrum antibiotics can upset the balance. Some of you may have experienced, I hear it all the time, like, you know, I was doing great until I had to take those 3 rounds of antibiotics and I never felt the same since. It throws off the cart and all of a sudden your immune system has to deal with it or some other system. If you have chronic constipation, that can often cause your bugs to be more proliferative. They kind of digest and they just get longer time to hang out and digest these foods to the point where they ferment and you actually can cause this imbalanced bacteria growth. People who take what are called proton pump inhibitors like Prevacid or Prilosec or Nexium, things to block indigestion and heartburn, they actually can cause problems lower down in the intestinal tract, causing bad bugs to grow. I mentioned stress, that can suppress your healthy probiotics. As an example, there are certain brain chemicals that float around your body called neurotransmitters, and when you have high stress, like what's called adrenaline or noradrenaline, it causes the unhealthy bacteria like Yersinia to grow. And we can measure bacteria and yeast on a stool sample here. You're showing here's probiotics, no growth, or 4+ growth, that's good. Or you can have 4+ of bad bacteria, or it could have normal levels. And here they're measuring yeast levels, the Candida albicans species. I have largely stopped doing stool testing because we find 3 things most of the time on most people. 1, you need to digest your food better. 2, which can be accomplished with digestive enzymes or eat different food. 2, you don't have enough probiotics. Or 3, you got the wrong kind of bugs. So $600 later, I'd say save your money. Let's just cut to the chase and maybe do a urine test, and we can measure and see if you're really out of whack with your organic acid, since it's a lot cheaper and much more direct to the point. So the way we rebalance this dysbiosis is by using prebiotic foods, which we'll discuss here in a minute, using fermented foods, certain kind of healthy probiotics or prebiotics that come from what are called specific carbohydrates, and ingesting more fiber from your diet. That's really how we direct this, is by changing up the bugs by what you're eating. This book was produced, came out in the early, like 1984, called The Yeast Connection, written by William Crook, MD. And in 1985, I was treating over 900 patients because I was one of the few doctors in the country treating yeast problems when these books came out. I don't know why I became the source for treating yeast here in the Twin Cities. So it was crazy, but I had a chance to see what worked and what didn't work for many people. We could see that there's an overlap of many different symptoms here caused by imbalanced yeast growth. So when you take an antibiotic, or if you eat a high sugar, higher fat diet, you get more yeast growth in your intestinal tract. And that can cause a lot of symptoms. Even to this day, 30 years later, standard medicine poo-poos this. Like, oh, you don't have yeast problems. Only if you have HIV or AIDS or cancer do you have a yeast problem in your body. That's just not true. The science does not state that. The science shows yeast can actually be a systemic problem. So the way you control that is through diet and probiotics and antimicrobial therapy. It's really quite simple, but you can solve so many problems. So if you haven't read a book like this, I'd highly recommend it. There's probably 50 websites just on yeast. So you just type in yeast connection and you'll find all kinds of stuff. The problem is you can't believe everything you read on the internet. So everybody's trying to hawk a product or sell something. Oh, we got the best product that'll cure this or cure that. It's a little tricky to figure that out, so that's why a lot of people just come in to see someone like myself to say, okay, how can I treat this directly? So, like I said, we measure urine levels, organic acids, to see these markers, see if there's too much yeast in the body. So you know all Pillsbury Doughboy, right? Relax, it's just a yeast infection. Gotta have a little fun with this kind of stuff, right? So when we treat the Candida albicans problem or yeast, we eliminate all sugar for a while, and that includes fruit juice, white flour, and refined grains, and most starchy foods. Foods like bananas and potatoes. So it's not forever. It's a short-term thing. We don't advocate that forever. And basically eating foods that are higher in protein and lower in carbohydrate. Most vegetables and fruits are lower in carbohydrates. So you're basically eating meats, vegetables, fruits, nuts, and seeds. So it's a diet that anybody can eat. It's not like you're living on bark tea and alfalfa sprouts or something, bizarre. And we avoid alcohol because that's like throwing gas in the fire. So that's where we call more of a streamlined caveman diet, where you're just getting off of the fun foods like cupcakes and Pop-Tarts and stuff I grew up on. So it's not that you can never have those again. It's just if you have a high yeast, you want to get healthier, that's the kind of stuff you want to go to. You can also find in the market a popular diet these days is called the paleo diet. Paleo means the Paleolithic man, the caveman way back, where they basically ate berries, nuts, what they could find, plants, whatever animal they could kill on the run and eat. Basically, it was pre-agriculture. They didn't have cows, they didn't have milk, they didn't have things like that. So now there's a whole popular diet called the paleo diet, and it's really good as long as you don't take it to the extreme of just eating only meat. Some people go, well, that's all I can do is just eat meat. Now, it's actually a lot of vegetables and other healthy dietary sources of fiber. There's other things in the intestinal tract that can cause problems, such as parasites. No different than in animals. Animals, as you know, you need to give periodic dewormers. Well, humans need it as well. We just tend to ignore it. We can do stool samples, and we can see all kinds of levels. That's called blastocystis, microscopic parasite. Kind of looks like it has a face, doesn't it? But it can cause all kinds of symptoms, mostly digestive-related symptoms.
How often do you run into that?
How often are parasites? We find about 1 out of 2 people. If we test for it, we find it. Oh yeah, it's really common. Yep, it's crazy. It may not be causing any symptoms though. A lot of people.
See, Doug, I knew there was something wrong.
It's not like 2 tapeworms?
Rarely is it actually worms. They're typically microscopic. Like stuff you go down to Mexico and you get diarrhea. They're microscopic. They're not actually tapeworms. When I was in college, I remember reading there was a study where they found on autopsies, 16% of all autopsies performed, they could find remnants of a pork tapeworm in the muscle of like in the shoulder of humans. Well, yeah, that was back in the 70s. I'm not sure, they haven't done any studies since then I've seen, but yeah, it is pretty common. It's just a matter of whether it's causing issues or not. Here's a laboratory that we use out of North Carolina, and they did a study where they measured 13,000 plus random samples, and they found 12% of them have this blastocystis and other types of parasites in lower numbers. But overall, 23% of all samples tested had at least one parasite. just what a lab test looks like when you measure these things, either they're there or they're not, and then they give you pictures of them. Well, the way you treat them is through the same kind of things we do to treat yeast and bacteria. Sometimes it does require anti-parasite drugs for 2 to 5 days or a week. Those are more severe cases that you got some intractable problem. But most people don't need that. Here's an example showing how parasites, this blastocystis, can cause irritable bowel syndrome. And that when they gave them anti-parasite therapy, their symptoms resolve 80% of the time. So it can be simple as that sometimes. Okay, moving in a different direction here. Showing that the immune system normally does not develop allergies. And one of the reasons why is we have breast milk contains different proteins that stimulate lactic acid producing bacteria in the intestinal tract. And that creates what we call oral tolerance. So it's obviously, we all know it's preferable to breastfeed. And just like in nature, animals, mammals, they all breastfeed. And those that don't survive. Those that just do, in humans, that just do bottles or formula, they don't thrive as well, and they're higher incidence towards allergies and so forth, showing that they have actually a higher level of asthma, inflammatory skin problems, and mouse problems, and digestive issues. Infants with a family history of allergy, like asthma, who received lactobacillus probiotic had a 50% in atopy at 2 years old and again at 4-year-old. So basically the moral here is that when you give probiotics, you actually could prevent asthma, allergies, and all kinds of inflammatory problems. So it begins right at birth and continues into infant time. So probiotics actually began by farmers in Bulgaria. That's where actually the word probiotic came from. They discovered that the yogurt contained this unknown compound, and they identified it as, they call it Lactobacillus bulgaricus, named after Bulgaria. So farmers actually were the ones that started this whole thing back in the day. This goes back into the early 1900s. It actually means for life. That's what probiotic means, is for life. So really, when we give probiotics, it must be of a human origin. It should be resistant to stomach acid and bile, and they should be able to adhere to the gut lining so they can colonize and form little forts. That's really what a probiotic should do. There's many probiotics in the market that are like, say, soil microbes, which is good for the soil and the plant, but there's no science showing that they're actually, if you take those microbes and give it orally, that they're really beneficial. They'll stay in your intestinal tract. They're on the market, but we don't know if they're safe or not. So I tend to use things that have been used in studies that are human-based. So some of the stuff I've already said, where it improves digestion, prevents antibiotic-associated loose stools and diarrhea, it prevents infections and so forth. It helps prevent urinary tract infections, which is very common in some people. And bifidus has similar effects. It can help treat colic, protect against inflammatory bowel problems, irritable bowel. It even reduces death and illness caused by a certain kind of colitis. And research shows that it's anti-cancer. So these are not small effects. Little microbes have big effects. In late pregnancy, it's interesting that even just as little as 1 billion units in these 1,400 plus women was given one dose, 1 billion, or in baby, and given to babies for 6 months, they had fewer respiratory infections, less constipation in early infancy. Very simple, but straightforward. They make our B vitamins, some of them anyway, and they help break down the chemicals in fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds are called phytochemicals. Phytochemicals is what makes the vegetable or fruit colorful, like red and purple and green and yellow, orange, tan. They break that down, so you actually don't absorb those things whole. Your bacteria metabolize it into small chemicals called metabolites, that's what you're actually benefiting through fruits and vegetables. But you need healthy probiotics to do that job. So if you have a recent antibiotic that you're taking, you're not going to get as much nutrients out of your diet. So it's really imperative to make sure your probiotics get back up to speed, because they actually help you absorb your minerals better, and they help move your intestinal contents through your gut, called peristalsis, so you don't get constipation. And what's very exciting is that these bugs actually help move metals like mercury, cadmium, lead, and arsenic out of your body. Your intestinal bacteria provide about 30% of your body's detoxification ability. So it's not a minor problem or minor deal. It's a big, big deal. Here we're showing that antibiotics will keep mercury in your body for a half-life, how long it stays in your system, for 100 days. When you have probiotics, it's only about 10. So it gives you an example of how well your body moves these toxic compounds out. Yeah?
Does that help move free radicals too then?
Yes, it does. The probiotics move and detoxify, and by doing that, it improves its glutathione molecule, and that's what glutathione is, a protein that your cells use to neutralize free radicals. So you're exactly right. And free radicals actually cause most of our health conditions today, like cancer, heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, and whatever else. So that NutriChelate product I mentioned earlier, that's one reason why we give it, is to increase antioxidant to oppose free radicals, but also to help the bacteria get healthier along the gut lining to prevent leaky gut. Very good question. So there are many kind of supplements. Lactobacillus, there's various species. You can find these on labels. And we don't really know which one is the most important one. You'll see Acidophilus is probably the most common. But I tend to use the Plantarum, the Acidophilus, and the Rhamnosus as the most, three most Lactobacillus species. And there are actually healthy Streptococcus. Strep is not necessarily a bad thing, because there's a healthy strep and bad strep. There's different kinds of bifidobacteria. There's these various species. We don't know which one's more important than the others. But some studies show, well, this species did this, but we really don't have a conclusion like you have to have this one to be healthy. Usually it's a blend, and you're going to get these through food. So when you're eating food, your bacteria, they're going to come in all shapes and forms with food. So it doesn't have to be really difficult or try to make your mind get warped on this. But the interesting thing is that this company called Consumer Lab, where they go around and they test products, mostly vitamins, they did a test here and they measured 25 probiotics, and they found that 8 out of the 25 contain less than 1% of the claimed number of live bacteria, or the expected minimum of 1 billion. So the regulation of the products are not working yet. So that's why I don't use most of the stuff in the health food stores, because we don't know what's on the label. You know, is it good? I don't know. So I kind of stick with a few brands called Metagenics or that Culturelle. So it makes it more difficult for the average consumer, because you don't really know what you're getting.
Have you seen any research on the effect of the DNA from these bacteria and so forth versus the live culture? So in other words,
yes.
would need the live?
Yes, there's research showing that even if the bacteria is dead, you're still getting a physiological or systemic effect into your nervous system, your immune system, and so forth, even though the species are not live. That is true. So, like for example, with my horses, I give them a type of probiotic that's actually dead. It's a type of yeast and bacteria, but the studies clearly show that it's activating their immune system in a healthy way. So that's the upside. So it doesn't necessarily have to be live, but it has to be the right kind of species. So it needs to have something on the label or something in the content. That's the problem. Is the label could say this, but we don't know if it's in there or not. So it's kind of tricky. But that's a very good question.
What kind of horses did you say you needed?
No, I've got too many already. Oh no, it's a part-time job for me. Somebody asked me, well, how does your day start? I said, well, I get up and I do barn chores for 2 hours. And they're like, what? I thought you're a doctor. It's like, well, I am, but this is what I do. They're like, God, so you must live on a farm. I said, yes, I do. People in Edina who think you're a little, well, don't get me started. It's a different world. Okay, moving on here. So our probiotics are very safe. They're normal. In cases of infection are very rare. Only when you have a very serious life-threatening infection like Clostridia difficile or C. diff, you would not want to give a probiotic at that time. Because it gets right into your bloodstream live, it'd be a little infective. That's really rare. The science shows less than 1 case per million people of having infective heart conditions. And 143 different studies in this from 1961 to 1988, over 7,500 people, no side effects. So they're very, very safe. So when you take a probiotic, you may not know if there's anything in there, but at least you're not going to react to it. So how long do you take probiotics? Well, we are telling people to take them permanently, take them indefinitely. And ranges between 1 to 100 billion. We strive for somewhere in that 30 to 60 billion range is probably ideal of lactobacillus, and the same thing with bifidobacteria. The Saccharomyces boulardii is a non-human yeast, but it's very competitive against bad bacteria. They displace Clostridia and other kind of species. They don't live in your intestinal tract. As soon as you stop taking it, they kind of filter away. So we generally just use them short term for like illnesses, but you can buy them in products like we use one called Ultraflora Spectrum that has a small amount in there, so you can take it continuously. So I mentioned our top 3 things. Fish oil and probiotics are my top 2 things we recommend people stay on every day. There's no downside. Here is showing that diet has the most powerful influence on gut microbial communities in healthy human subjects. A study published just last year showing that 75% of the food in our Western diet has limited or no benefit to the bugs in the lower intestine because most of those foods are being absorbed upstream that are mostly sugar and starch. Because we have the sad standard American diet. So very little of it actually reaches down into the small bowel to give benefit to our microbacteria and yeast. So ways to restore these bacteria, we want to use fermented foods, cultured foods, and we like to decrease the level of sugar and carbohydrate total because they're just not healthy for the gut bugs. And then one of the best things we can do is making sure our diet is high in fiber. There's a lot of foods. There's soluble and there's insoluble. There's 2 kinds of fibers. And you don't really largely have to figure out what you're eating when you're eating food, like, oh, is this soluble or insoluble? I have this up here to show you that some vegetables have soluble and some vegetables have insoluble, and also fruits and so forth. So there's a balance. And we really want both fibers in our body to help these bacteria and organisms populate.
How about oats?
Oats have a good fiber, very healthy for you. And you can see here in oats, there's 4.1 grams of fiber in 1 cup. And you can see here that navy beans is the highest at 19, and baked beans at 10. Down here we have lentils and split peas at 15 and 16. And 1 pear has about 10 grams of fiber. So these are the high fiber foods that you want to encourage. And as a note, meat, milk, and eggs has 0 fiber. So you want to have good levels of vegetables and fruits to get your fiber in addition to your meats and proteins. Yes?
Banana was on there as insoluble fiber and soluble fiber.
Yeah, it has a mixture of both.
It does.
Yes. Yep.
So if butter is good for you and butter is made from cream, should we eat cream on our oatmeal?
I do.
That's probably a personal taste. As long as you can tolerate the milk fat, yep.
Is oats not in the same category as yeast or flour?
Oats do not technically contain gluten. They're in the gluten family tree, but it's actually separate from wheat, rye, and barley. The problem is for people who are really super sensitive to gluten is that most oatmeal products are contaminated with wheat because they're processed in the same facilities. There are gluten-free oatmeals that are certified in the market, so you can get oatmeal that's gluten-free, so it's not really a problem. Some people who are really super sensitive, that are celiac, they cannot tolerate oatmeal because they're just so sensitized. It's not truly gluten, but it's kind of like gluten. It's kind of next step to it. So we have an issue here. Caveman ate about 100 grams a day. Now they died from infection. They had early life their lifespan was like 35 years of age. So they had their own problems with infections and hygiene and whatnot. Maybe they got struck by a saber-toothed tiger. I don't know, I'm making stuff up here, but we know they didn't live very long. Well, the average American consumes 14 grams a day. Now, our guidelines say we should have 14 grams for every 1,000 calories. None of my patients are eating 1,000 calories a day. They'd probably be withered and weak, but they're eating more, 2,500 plus, and they should be getting 35 grams of fiber. The problem is they're eating the wrong kind of foods that are just lack of fiber. So it comes back to the same thing we all know. My grandmother told me when I was 3 years old, eat your vegetables. She didn't even know anything about fiber back then. She just knew that I was supposed to eat vegetables. We all know this. It's just a matter of doing it and putting more attention on it. So what fiber does, it does a lot of things. It actually slows things down, slows it down in the upper gut so you can absorb your food better, but it moves it faster through the large intestines so you don't reabsorb your toxins that you're trying to get rid of. It holds onto water, it forms a gel, it stimulates bacteria growth, and the fiber, which is not digested, is broken down by your bacteria to these short-chain fatty acids. That's really what fiber does. When you don't have enough fiber, you get large, you get type 2 diabetes, you get cardiovascular disease, and cancers. Diabetes, heart disease, cancer, the top 3 diseases in our country. So it's the nuts and bolts, right back to the basics. Probiotic-rich foods. These foods actually contain probiotics in small amounts. So milk products that are fermented can contain soy products, miso and tempeh, which is more popular in Asia, but some people buy it here in the United States, or they like in health food stores or Asian restaurants, when you go to a Chinese restaurant. Homemade root beer and ginger beer, not the stuff we buy at A&W. More authentic stuff actually can contain probiotics. You can buy a drink in bottles called kombucha, which is basically a probiotic yeast kind of compound. Sauerkraut is quite naturally high in probiotics. Even beer and wine contain probiotics. Not that I'm advocating lots of beer and wine, but there is yeast in beer and wine.
And what about like raw milk? We used to just dip the milk right on the bowl.
Right.
That's good too.
Well, it has raw whey has some of the probiotics in there. It's all about tolerance at this point. So my answer, whether raw milk is good or not, it's not about just because it's raw, it's do you tolerate it? Does your immune system tolerate it? So it's kind of a case-by-case basis. So yeah, I grew up that way too. Oh yeah.
Skim the cream off in the morning for Wheaties or Puff Wheat.
Right. The best, huh?
John wants to know about Mountain Dew.
We'll have a talk later about that. Actually, I was addicted to that when I was 16 years old. I drank 4 Mountain Dews a day.
Yeah, I was a Mountain Dew hog.
Oh yeah, couldn't get enough.
Probably still am.
Yeah. I could tell you a story, but I'll keep moving. So sauerkraut, for example, contains various types of lactobacillus. It starts out with one kind of species, and then it continues by another one, and it finishes with another one. So there's actually 3 or 4 species that make sauerkraut. The problem with commercial sauerkraut when you buy in your local store, it's all been heavily heated, so you lose a lot of your live bacteria. So you're not really getting probiotics in your commercial sauerkraut. So you can make your own. It's not really difficult. It just takes a little time. Anybody here make their own sauerkraut or grew up on it? Okay. All right. As far as yogurts, the National Yogurt Association has a definition that it has to have live cultures added. It should be these 2 species. Danimals has 1 to 3 billion of the GG, and Dannon Activia has 1 to 3 billion of that. Homemade yogurt has a much higher level. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, it's tremendously different. As I mentioned, there's compounds in our fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds called polyphenols or phytochemicals, and that makes your good bacteria grow. So sources of these are examples is green tea, red wine, apples, onions, chocolate. See, there's a reason to eat chocolate, right? In moderation. Now the problem is if you buy just like your Hershey's or whatever, it's mostly sugar. So you want to leave them with the dark chocolate, ideally. So you can buy up to 85% dark chocolate bars, mostly in health food stores. You could, probably at your local store, you'd have to really look hard. But other foods like ginseng also. So these are examples of healthy plant compounds that make your bacteria grow. So these 2 scientists are talking to each other and said red wine makes them live longer, but they get to be a real pain. So one rat says the other, it has a timid nose with the usual notes of oak and vanilla. I can't believe you're drinking Merlot. Okay, weird humor. Anyway, so we have prebiotics. And I understand you guys talked about prebiotics earlier today. Yeah. So foods that are high in prebiotics have undigestible sugars that your body doesn't break down, but your bacteria thrive on it. So these kind of foods all have prebiotic content. So artichokes, not just Jerusalem artichokes, but regular artichokes, the garlic family, onions, leeks, most fruits, soybeans, asparagus, beans and peas, honey, green tea, eggplant. So there's a lot of foods you can eat that helps encourage good bacteria to grow in your gut. So basically you're taking non-digestible starches, your bacteria and your own digestive enzymes break them down, and you get these short-chain fatty acids. These are different names here. That's actually what makes your intestinal cell lining healthy, so you don't get problems in your gut. So it's actually food that's broken down by bacteria that actually feeds your intestinal gut cells. So prebiotics are found in breast milk. It's found in other foods. They go by names of like FOS or oligofructose, inulin. These are commercial products you can buy as supplements or powders. FOS is also found in onions, garlic, rye, chicory, blueberries, and bananas. And inulin is found mostly in chicory and artichokes. So if you eat a healthier diet, you're going to get between 2 and 8 grams per day. I give patients straight up inulin powder and FOS powder to make your bacteria grow for some people. So it's a therapeutic tool, but you can also just be eating more fruits and vegetables and get a lot of these ingredients. So some of the benefits of these prebiotics, they promote your good bugs, they lower your colon pH, they discourage the growth of bad bacteria, they prevent constipation, diarrhea, they actually improve your blood sugar balance, and they do not bind to minerals, so they're really very, very beneficial. So in summary, we want to look at our fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds that contain these phytochemicals to feed your good bacteria. Also, all those foods provide nurturing for all your cells, so it's really your core of your diet. So you can be a vegetarian and just eat those foods, but you're going to miss out on a lot of protein. You can take a vegetarian approach and just do beans with grains or beans with nuts. And I did that for many, many years. And I found out that I felt better when I had some kind of fish or animal protein. I just felt better. Kind of felt like how I was when I was a kid. So it's a personal thing, but the science is showing that protein is extremely important, especially as you get older. As you get older, we tend to lose muscle mass called sarcopenia. We lose our muscle mass. If you don't have adequate protein, you cannot catch up. So anybody over the age of 50 has a tendency to lose muscle mass, especially if you don't use it. You lose it. And the only way to really recover is having adequate dietary protein. So most of us in this room probably, that's not an issue because you're eating a wide varied diet that probably has protein. Up in the cities, I treat a lot of people who are strict vegetarians and mostly younger individuals, but some older people too, that yeah, you can do that. It takes a lot of focus on your diet to make sure you're getting sufficient protein levels. So when we measure these people, we find many of them are deficient in protein. The only way to clear out toxins from your body, which is a serious problem we all have, because you have to breathe, right? Because everybody in this room right now is breathing high levels of mercury. It's just part of our planet. It's just part of where we live. If you have a low protein diet, you're not going to get rid of it. It's crucial. So when we lecture around the country on this topic, that's my expertise area is toxins. You have to focus on protein. It's a really big deal, along with your vegetables, fruits, nuts, and seeds. If you want to know whether you should eat many grains, well, I'd say you should really get yourself tested to see if you tolerate these. Get a better test. And same thing with dairy. So it's kind of a variable deal. When people ask, should I eat that or not? It's like, well, let's test it and see. We want to focus.
When you say,
go ahead.
like peas and peas, the beans and peas.
Yep.
Are you talking about frozen, fresh, canned? How do you deal with that?
So beans and peas contain the prebiotic compounds, whether they're frozen, fresh, or not. So you're going to get them because they're really not broken down by heat. They're there.
Same thing with onion, even though you maybe.
Yep, same thing with onion. Yep, they're non-digestible saccharides, starches. Anything that's fresh, obviously, is going to have more nutrient content, so it's preferable, sure. But some things are really hard to find. Fresh green beans in the middle of January in Minnesota, yeah, it'd be pretty tough. So eating these foods that are prebiotics and then supplementing with probiotics either as a food itself or using it as a supplement. So that's pretty much what I came to speak on as far as the probiotic intestinal microbe connection. That's where I hang out in Montana. I'm an avid downhill skier, so I'm kind of one of these crazy guys.
What mountain is that?
That's called Lone Mountain in Big Sky. Yeah, okay. That's the peak of Big Sky. That's about 11,800 feet, and we ski down the front of this, so it's pretty crazy.
You ski down there?
Yeah, we do. Oh yeah.
How do you get up?
There's
Black diamond.
yeah, it's like a double, triple black diamond. No, I'm not. So there's actually a lift down in this valley in here. You can't see if there's a gondola. It takes you right to the top of that hut, and they drop you off, and then you can ski down, then you can come down here. Some crazy people actually ski down this thing right here, and I won't do that. That's.
No, up to this point, I thought you
It's a thrill of victory.
Or taking
Yeah. My wife thinks
As
I'm
long as we don't avalanche, I always say nothing is any more dangerous than you make it. And if you feel you're in control, you're confident in your abilities,
well.
hey, Mount Everest. Exactly.
It is about technique. So if you don't have the right skill set, you don't want to go up there. No, it's not for beginners.
If you don't think you can do it, then you better not even
No.
try.
There's been times where I've gone to a mountain peak like this and I look down going, no, I'm not doing that. No, I know my limit. So what's interesting is they actually done studies on these crazy guys. They're called these.
We call them adrenaline.
Yeah, they're called face jumpers. Where they have these wingsuits and they jump off these mountain peaks. They're totally psycho. And they've actually done blood samples, and they found they're really very low dopamine people. It's a brain chemical. They're very low dopamine. So when they actually They get an adrenaline rush, and their dopamine just skies high, and they get a thrill out of it. Well,
We think they're suicidal,
exactly.
and we've seen
Right.
that in snowmobiling.
That's why they do is they get this big thrill from it. Well, I found out what I do before I go up here now, I know how to increase my dopamine levels by amino acid therapy. So I'll take a fistful of stuff before I ski, and that keeps me kind of calm, and so I don't really do crazy stuff anymore. So I've backed off. My wife says, thank you. So I was up there just 3 years ago, though. That's where I was. That's what we're skiing. That's what we're skiing right there. That's pretty rough stuff. So,
Question.
yes.
How fast are you skiing down that hill?
You're actually skiing pretty slow.
Yeah.
You're skiing, you basically go a little bit like 10 feet and you turn. So you go 10 feet and you turn. So you're constantly doing this all the way down. So you're not going straight down.
Downhill.
No, if you go downhill, you'll be dead probably. No, because actually what you can't see,
You don't see as you're falling how steep it is.
I don't know, you can't, up here, you can see if you come up close, but right here, there's little texture, looks like little bumps. These are called moguls, and some of those moguls can be, 4 or 5 feet deep, but that's where skiers carve out these little turns. They ski like 8 feet turn, 8 feet turn. You end up building up snow as you keep pushing your skis. You get these bumps that build up, so you ski through these bumps. And it's challenging if you don't know how to ski. So we don't go up there unless there's fresh snow, because when there's really deep fresh snow, you don't have to deal with all these bumps. You can just kind of ski much easier, and it's not quite as scary. But last time I was up here 3 years ago, I was coming down right here, and I wiped out, I caught a tip, and I flipped, and I kind of went down backwards down the hill. And I slid about probably 30 yards. And I stopped, and I shook myself off, make sure I was there. And this guy up above says, "You okay down there?" I went, "Wow, I thought I was the only one up there. I didn't see anybody up there." He goes, "Yeah, I'm the ski patrol. We have to drag your butts out of here some days." He came down, made sure I was okay. And he says, "Okay, I see you're a good skier, so I'll let you keep going." But he says, a lot of times we take them off in toboggans and drag their butt out of there and say, "You're stupid. You shouldn't be up here."
You're in over your head.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The key to when you know you've got it made is you do something exciting, you get to the bottom, there's no adrenaline shaking.
Right.
We sled with all these film Thunderstruck and Modmania guys,
Uh-huh.
and they'll get to the bottom and they're doing this number. My brother and I are just ice cold. It's like,
Yeah.
we got it out.
There we go.
But the mountain is still king, no matter what you think. And if you give the moment, it can take you down and spank you or kill you.
Well,
Yeah, what happens when you drive over a cliff?
yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
That was a bunny hill. First broken bone in 52 years. I took my wife out to Tobity, and it was snowing cats and dogs, so I was out leading, and I should have stayed on the trail like my brother said. No, I was driving off trail. But I was only putzing 5 or 10 miles an hour off a little cliff, and the next thing you know, I got a broken left ankle.
Yeah.
Live and learn.
That comes to the territory if you're going to go off trail. See, I don't go off trail. I stay inside the resorts. When you see all these people, they die on the avalanche out west,
See,
almost all of them are out of bounds.
yeah.
Almost all of
Doing
them.
something stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you
If
get,
it looks dangerous, you flat out stay off.
right. So I have a few other slides on Roundup if you want to see those.
Sure, let's see it. So
Okay.
I'd like to know, how many in the room here are now taking a probiotic?
All right.
Is the vitamin enzyme a probiotic?
Just probiotic.
All right.
But, okay. So the bottom line, the two things we can do is get a good probiotic and fish oil.
Probiotic and fish oil would be high priority. Yes.
And follow up with olive oil if you want.
Olive oil would be very helpful, and a little coconut oil for your cooking. And you don't want to cook with your olive oil. You don't want to cook it. You want to basically drizzle it over your salad or put it into a smoothie shake or mix it in with, say, some avocado for guacamole dip or bean dip or whatever. But just don't cook with it. You can cook with it. You just will lose the value of these antioxidant content. The oils are still good for cooking, but not so much for the antioxidant content. So,
beer
yeah.
and wine fourth?
What's that?
Was beer and wine fourth?
Yes.
But, no,
What kind of oil?
krill.
Krill oil. Good question. Krill oil has omega-3 fatty acids, the EPA and DHA content. Not a lot of studies, but there are studies showing it's very healthy for you. Krill is a small crustacean from the ocean that whales eat, and you put it into capsules. The advantage with krill oil, it has like a red pigment to it. It's called a carotenoid or carotene. It's another antioxidant. So the people that market the krill oil, their selling point is that you can take little less of it to get the same effect as fish oil. We don't really have the studies to show that's true. I use krill oil as a supplement with patients. I use mostly fish oil because that's where all the research is. But some people want to take small amounts, like a little. Krill oils are really small little gel caps. They're really super small in size. And the advantage with krill oil is that you're taking such small amounts, you won't get much burnt fish taste. But you have to take really a lot of them to get the blood levels high in the blood for your omega-3 fatty acids. So there's a lot of positives to it. We just have to take more of it as a takeaway. Yep.
Is there any significant difference between fermented fish oil and unfermented?
Fermented versus unfermented? Not that we know of. No. Not that I've seen. Yep.
As you look at the general population today, what are some of the things that are alarming to you that you see health-wise? What are some of the major things that you see coming down the pipe that you are somewhat alarmed?
The biggest thing that I'm alarmed by is the increasing incidence. Well, there's a number of things. I'll start with one. Is our children, our future generations. You've all seen the statistics and heard about autism. It's just a runaway freight train. I've been treating autism now for 18 years in large numbers, and I've been really busy trying to train other doctors in the 5-state area to take care of these kids because I can't keep up. There was times we'd have kids show up in a van from Iowa, 16 kids would come up in one van just because there's no one else down there to treat them. So this was in the late 90s, and it was like, where are these kids coming from? Well, I'll show you a slide here on Roundup, but that's one of many things that's causing an increased level of neurological problems in children and adults. Is all these nerve problems. I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I got migraines, I can't focus, I can't concentrate. My child has attention deficit or hyperactivity, or the severe end is autism. All these neurological problems, and in adults, as we get older, it's all about losing your memory, like Alzheimer's. By the year 2030, there's going to be 15 million people in this country that'll have Alzheimer's or pre-dementia, pre-senile dementia. That's just like scary stuff to think about that I'm most concerned about.
Isn't that the same dementia in Alzheimer's? Because my dad died now.
Yep.
And the doctor thought he had Alzheimer's, and he went to that mental institute in Sioux Falls to get an extra second opinion, and they come up with the conclusion he had a severe case of dementia. Is that the same thing?
There's different types of dementia, but they all have kind of the end road of the same thing. You lose your memory. Yes. So there's different kinds of dementias, but it's one of the major concerns because I showed that author, Dr. David Perlmutter, the neurologist who wrote a book called Grain Brain. You read that book and you'll see why there's such a concern about our diet in relation to brain problems. Because I think he said by year 2050, which would be longer way out than some of us are going to be alive, 1 in 5 people are going to be diagnosed with a brain problem. That's what the statistics are showing. And that's largely, I think, because of the toxicology, the toxins we're exposed to through our big business. And so right now, I think it's the number is 45% of our country is run on coal-powered, power plants. They're spewing large amounts of mercury. I'm not trying to be a political, pro-environment kind of guy. It's just a fact. We are exposed to a lot of stuff. And half of the mercury in the air doesn't come from our own power plants. It comes from China and dumps on us. So we can control our thing, but we can't control what they're doing over there. So there's a lot of issues politically. My biggest concern is just the toxicology approach of what's going on in science. there's a lot of conflict of interest where science is only being, well, let's put it this way. Scientists will get grant money to do their research, but you better not publish something bad like showing pictures like that stomach back there caused by Roundup. Saying, well, humans, you can't do stuff like that. You'll be like shoved, you won't have any money to do any research. So the problem is it's really political.
They're gun shy.
Very gun shy because it's all about their livelihood. The same thing with cancer research. It's been going on for 50 years now. Well, it's about grant money. And so we know what causes cancer. It's very clear. But to come out and say it's caused by all these toxins, there's over 87,000 chemicals in our environment today. 87,000. Only 500 have been studied to be looked at in terms of are they good or not. And it doesn't mean that they're banned, they're just looked at. So we're talking a huge imbalance of problems. So most of our problems we're seeing from cancer, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, all these neurological issues I just mentioned can be pinned right to toxins. That's where it's showing. We've all known this. No one wants to talk about it. It's a big elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about. So that's part of my mission. I belong to a group called the Institute for Functional Medicine. It's 35 other doctors. And I'm the only chiropractor nutritionist in the group. I get teased a lot, but I tease them a lot too. But my mission as a nutritionist is talking about toxins in relationship to these problems. And the only way to address it is one person at a time, because that's all I can do. We can't really control what Dow Chemical or 3M or whatever, what they're doing. But eventually, it's got to stop. And that's, I don't have the answers for that.
Obesity,
I
it
think
seems
we're-
like it's really epidemic, and really what alarms me is young children today.
Yes,
Because aren't we the leading country for obesity?
we are the leading country for obesity.
Is that related to the whole gut toxin?
Yes, it directly ties to your gut microbes, but also your what are called persistent organic pollutants, POPs. They have now studied and showed, actually one study came out of University of Minnesota here about 5 years ago, the relationship between obesity and diabetes and heart disease, especially obesity, with the persistent organic pollutants like mercury, diesel exhaust, pesticides, herbicides, various chemicals that are in our environment through food, air, and water, is causing your body to hold on to body weight. That's that simple. Yes, there can be other issues like overeating, if you eat too many calories, but it's this concept that, oh, you're just eating too much. No, not necessarily. I know people who are eating, 1,200 calories a day and they're still gaining weight. When we actually measure their blood levels and urine and such, they're really toxic. Their system is just polluted. So,
And when we say, like with soil, or we learn by treating the nerve biologically, we have to get rid of the toxins before we can really reach balance.
that's right.
And so it's really goes back to the biology, doesn't it?
It goes back to the basic biology, nutrition.
Yeah.
Yep, same thing. So when you're mineral deficient, you're probiotics deficient, fat deficient as far as the good fats, you can't grow good bacteria, plus you can't nurture your body, and then your genes become more pro-inflammatory. So actually as an example, when you actually have extra body weight that's fat, those cells produce more inflammation, and your body has to deal with that. So it's like a dog's chasing his tail. So one thing leads to another, so at some point you kind of have to stop the process and go, okay, let's get back to basics. Start with the gut first. And that's our premise in functional medicine, is we always go back to the gut as our first step. So everybody's like, well, I want to get these toxins out of my body. So no, we go to the gut first. Make sure you're eating the right foods and have the right kind of bugs. And then we can address everything else, from hormones to toxins to whatnot. So,
Bring your business card and you take on new clients.
yes, I do.
Not as long as they drink Mountain Dew.
I brought a couple cards if you want one. It's fine. So,
Do you have any brands of fish oil that you use or recommend? Or?
sure. You can buy one in most health food stores or on the online called Nordic Naturals. Nordic Naturals, Nordic. That's a common name brand. I use one from a distributor in the Twin Cities called Omega Pure 600. It's called, a company called Nutridyne, but you have to get that through like my clinic or a doctor, so it's not readily available. But you know, most of my patients who come to me, they have access to this stuff. It's a very cost-effective fish oil. But Nordic Naturals is probably one of the more reputable companies. They have a lot of studies showing what they provide works. Any other questions before I go on to a couple doom and gloom slides?
Where your office is.
My office is in Edina. It's 494 in France, so the beltline that surrounds the Twin Cities, on the south side of the Twin Cities. So it's
You go up 35W and hit 494, go west down to France Avenue, about what, a mile or two down.
about a mile.
And then it's right by the, right off on the right.
Yeah, the landmark is Fuddruckers, which is a hamburger joint. Yeah, we're right behind Fuddruckers.
Or Southdale Shopping Mall.
Yeah, Southdale. Yep, Southdale.
Boron, do you think that we're not getting enough in our foods for brain function?
Boron? You know, it's an interesting topic. For humans, we don't have a lot of research, but it's growing. We know that boron is very important for bones. So for many adults have bone loss. Bone loss is really about inflammation. It's not because you don't have enough calcium. It's actually about inflammation. Well, boron is one of those minerals that you need to have sufficiently to have no bone loss and inflammation. Boron also seems to help thyroid and other hormone function. And there's new research showing that it can help improve cognition, like depression and anxiety and other kind of cognitive issues. So it's kind of one of those up-and-coming things we'd like to know more about. Okay. Well, I have some doom and gloom slides on Roundup if you want to see them. All right. Okay. Okay. So glyphosate, it disrupts our gut bacteria. It actually suppresses our first line of detox called P450s. All of us have an enzyme system in our gut lining and in our liver. Actually, throughout our body, but they're highest in the gut, liver area. This is your phase 1, it's called. And when you ingest anything, whether it's a food or a drug or a chemical, everything has to be processed by phase 1. Well, Roundup disrupts the gut bugs and it suppresses phase 1, so that first pass is kind of like limp. It doesn't really respond very well. So, showing here, interfering with the detox of these chemicals, Roundup enhances the damaging effects of other food-borne chemical residues and environmental toxins. Well, the people that make glyphosate say it's completely healthy and normal. In fact, one of my doctors on my team, I was in Denver 10 days ago, his son started to work for, I don't know if I should mention the name of the company.
Yeah, Monsanto.
There we go. All right. Monsanto. And they said, this stuff is so healthy, you could drink that quart right there and not have a problem. That's what they told him on a sales meeting. It's so healthy, you could drink this and don't worry about it.
You should have said, why don't you drink it?
Is that outright deceiving and being?
That's lying.
That's lying is what it is. Because what's happening is they're saying the human studies, which actually if you look at the human studies, they're all short term. They're talking weeks, maybe a month or two. They're not long term, like 9 months to a year. They can't talk. How long?
22 years.
22 years. Wow.
Have you met Don Huber?
No, but I've got slides that I've looked at his slides. I've seen, yes. I've seen his slides, and he's very impressive.
So how is it disrupting the gut microbiome?
I'll show you. Yep. So basically, it's disrupting the gut bacteria, but lo and behold, it has nothing to do with your human health cells. That's what the market position is. That's why they say it's fine, don't worry about it. Well, it interferes with this phase 1 enzyme. It disrupts the synthesis of or creation of certain aromatic proteins, amino acids, by these gut bugs. And it also interferes with how we move sulfur through our system. As you know, as of I don't know what it is now, but in 2007, 180 million pounds were applied annually, mostly in corn and soy. It's gone up quite a bit since then, I'm sure. The way this actually inhibits these enzymes, it actually messes with the metals, the minerals. So deficiencies in iron, cobalt, molybdenum, copper, and other metals associated with celiac disease can also be attributed to Roundup because they chelate these elements. So Roundup binds these elements, and we find also in celiac disease deficiencies of certain proteins matches Roundup's known depletion of these amino acids. So as an example with celiac, how it correlates with usage of glyphosate.
So what we're doing there, I would assume, Ken, since we're binding that up, we're affecting the enzymatic activity.
Doesn't get made.
Doesn't get made.
That's right.
Okay, because now in other countries, because my brother-in-law has been over in Africa, he says that's the primary source that people use for committing suicide.
Yes.
So, yeah, suicide. So what then causes that quick suicidal?
Sure that's not fair water?
No, it's glyphosate.
That's an article.
It's glyphosate, because my brother-in-law checked that out, and he's like, I can't believe that. They said it was glyphosate.
Well, it's a biotoxin, so if it suppresses our phase 1 enzymes, your body can't detoxify it, it shuts it down, so you can't clear it. I don't know. I don't know how much you'd have to take. I don't know. We know that fish are exposed to glyphosate, develop problems that are similar to celiac disease, and basically we know that the effects of this Roundup stuff is on our gut bacteria. That's the major issue at hand here.
But glyphosate is also considered a biocide, isn't it?
Correct. Yes. Yep.
So it's affecting in two ways. One, by chelating out the minerals, and then also as a biocide.
And messes with your amino acids, and also as a biocide. So here we're finding this phase 1 enzyme is messed with, so you can't remove the toxins. And it's interesting is that also the vitamin D is not activated, or you can't use vitamin A and other sulfate supplies of the gut. So there's probably multiple mechanisms at hand here with glyphosate. Now, what's interesting is that celiac disease has an increased risk to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which has also been implicated in glyphosate exposure. And various reproductive issues such as infertility, miscarriages, and birth defects are also could be explained. So this is still in the theoretical stage. So this is actually the name of the pathway. Bacteria have the Shikimate pathway. So Monsanto's position is that we don't have the Shikimate pathway, so it doesn't affect us. Well, hello, how many bacteria do you have in your intestinal tract? So they're ignoring this fact that we have a 10-to-1 ratio of bugs to human cells. That's the actual mechanism that they're pointing to in their early research now, is this pathway, how it interferes. So that kind of says everything I've already said.
And now that's becoming very prevalent in, I think, all these here farm stores. The city people use it probably way worse than we do as farmers.
I agree with you.
Because they don't understand the danger. At least we do a little bit.
But the
Yes.
concentration that they sell to the city slickers is tiny. So they
Yeah,
might
they
close
use
it down,
tons of it.
but the concentration is
Oh,
so low.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but they, most of them sit there going,
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, I agree.
Then they
But they're-
re-soak an hour
so
later.
low.
Well, they get it down to $6 a gallon. We're, putting on 2 quarts
Yeah.
and doing 100 acres an hour. How much that blows a lot of city people away.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, I agree. So the next 15 slides are kind of interesting. And just keep in mind that there is no proof. These are associations. So where there's smoke, there's fire, though. So they're showing an association between obesity and when Roundup was started to heavily used. So the red is the Roundup, and here's the rise of obesity.
I think a lot of parallels.
A lot of parallels here. You'll see how this is going on with all the next slides. Here we have new cases of diabetes diagnosed annually. Well, here's the rise of the incidence. This is genetically engineered soy and corn crops, and this is corn and soy, but the blue lines is the incidence of diabetes. Doesn't prove it, but it's very suspicious, isn't it?
Has the World Health Organization been aware of all this?
I don't know. I don't know for sure. Here's the rise in blood pressure in relation to GE soy and corn over the last 18 years. And you'll see these graphs all kind of look the same. This is hospitalizations for acute kidney injury in relationship to Roundup. Here we have autism, basically non-existent for like the 70s, 80s, 90s, and all of a sudden mid-90s, that's when they started coming to my office in 95. It just blew up, and look at that, just going crazy. So,
On autism, is there anything you can do to treat the kids or not?
yes, there is. I'd say 1 out of 2 of the kids respond very well to our functional medicine approach. It's a full-fledged approach because it's not like half-baked. You have to do diet, supplements, and a lot of stuff to clean up the gut. And some kids have permanent damage, yes. So some kids are always going to be a little off. A lot of kids.
Explain to me what it is. In pause. Exactly.
Autism is basically where in the mother's womb, the baby is not, it's being exposed to, what their new research is showing is that the baby is being exposed to environmental pollutants. It doesn't show up until about 18 months of age. And they're looking at ways to identify it earlier, such as lack of eye contact. Like at 12 months of age, most kids can follow you and they look at you and they recognize you. Well, they're finding these autistic kids are like glazed out. They're just like, they're not focused. Well, at 18 months of age, there's often seems to be a tipping point. Something tips them over the edge. For about 5 years in the late 90s, a lot of people pointed their fingers at vaccines as causing autism. And if you look at the rates of vaccinations that contain mercury, thimerosal, it's a preservative used in vaccine compounds, there's a very strong relationship, and actually there was a lot of cover-up. And what the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, did is they actually used research from Denmark and said, see, this does not cause autism. Right here, it shows it did not do it. Now we find out 15 years later, it was all fudged.
Didn't they send the inoculations from the U.S. over to another country, like, I don't know, it was India, and those children?
Yes.
So
Like,
that was a cover-up, too. They
Well,
got rid of it in the United States. but
exactly.
another country
Why
they're
did
also
they cover
worried
this?
about.
What is it?
money.
All the money.
It's all about money. Merck, Eli Lilly, and the big boys, it's all about money. And so they had egg in their face, so they voluntarily, even though it wasn't a concern, let's take thimerosal out of the vaccines because it's really not a concern, but we better take it out. Well, it's all started in 1995 when the Environmental Protection Agency said you can only have so much mercury exposure, so much per person per year. Well, they looked at the schedule of the vaccines and went, oh my God, there is lots of mercury in these vaccines. We're already exceeding the allowance for these young babies. So they've said, oh, no, it's not a problem. Here's the studies that show it's not a problem. And then a couple years later, they took it out and say, well, we just did it to make everybody feel good about it. I'm paraphrasing. I'm not saying the vaccines cause autism, but it's very suspicious. I think there's other reasons, because they have found, for example, in children who are in the mother's womb, the closer you live to a field that's high in pesticide sprayed, those kids have a higher incidence of autism.
So autism is just the inability to reason and focus.
Well, they have very little executive function, meaning they can't reason, they can't focus, they can't remember. They're just kind of like, they're just not focused at all. They understand you. They may not be able to speak, or they may have limited speech. They develop very slowly. No, they don't grow out of it. They can, as their body develops, they can get stronger and maybe adapt to it better. But if they're not treated directly with, we call the biomedical approach, their chance to recovery is very limited, so they're going to have issues the rest of their life. So we find that about they might have uncontrolled body movements, like stuff like this, or they get all kinds of twitches, or they can't look at you eye to eye. They don't like to interact with you socially. They just avoid people. They may have inappropriate behavior. They'll come right up to your face and stick your finger in your eye, or they don't even know what they're doing. They're not trying to be mean. Some of these kids are savants. They have tremendous musical skills. They can remember stuff like, I met this one kid in 1996. He could sing every verse to every Beatles song, but he couldn't talk to you like I'm talking right now. It was like freaky. I was like, okay.
He couldn't tie his shoe either.
He couldn't tie his shoe, he couldn't feed himself, he couldn't do nothing, but he could sing every Beatles song. I was like, okay, that's pretty unusual. Most kids are not like that. It's kind of a sad deal, but it's really stressful for parents to watch your kids go through this. So it appears to be, from our point of view, that it's a toxicology issue, that they're exposed to toxins early on. There might be some tipping point. It turns out that many of these kids respond well to a gluten-free, dairy-free diet because these foods, specifically those two, there are certain peptides or protein fractions that are not broken down in the gut. They get absorbed, they go to the brain, they interact with what are called morphine receptors, just like cocaine, heroin, opioid drugs that you take for pain. They interact with these receptors and they alter your nerve function. Well, it turns out that the gluten and the dairy do the same thing. They alter their function so the nerve cells can't communicate directly. So if we remove those foods, then there's less chatter in the brain per se. We can identify those in those blood tests. I didn't mention it there, but there's called gluteomorphin and casomorphin. They're actually things we can measure and see if they're high. So we'd measure urine levels and blood levels and see, should we go on this diet, yes or no? We find about 1 out of 2 kids respond to diet with autism. It's complicated because we have to give them supplements, and when you put products into a pill form or a powder, I don't care if you're a normal adult, it's going to taste crappy. So we try to cover it with sweeteners and flavors and stuff, but I have one parent, he actually pretty much has to hold them down like a hog and shove it in his mouth. And it's like, no, it's not really the best way to do it. But he's responded so well. This kid has like blossomed, where he's now 3 years later, he can talk and he's actually communicating. He's still going to have a messed up life, but he actually is doing better.
How do they go to adulthood then?
Well, a lot of these kids are institutionalized if they're severe. A lot of them just kind of become permanent children with their aging adults as they live in the same house. So it's really a challenge financially and emotionally for the families. And that's one of the biggest concerns we have when we look at health problems. Our future generations, it's like, wow.
Well,
So,
we're not going to live as long, this next generation, as the previous.
well, that's the latest study showing that, yes, for the first time in our history in the last 100 years, we're not going to live as long, largely because of stuff like this. We don't know, but fingers are pointing at certain biotoxins. Yes.
What's our vaccine rate out to now? How many times do they vaccinate?
I think the number of vaccines in a typical, by the time they get 36 months of age, they've had close to 52 different vaccine compounds. They're typically, some are repeated, a number of them. So there's booster shots and so forth. So it often starts right at birth. So right at birth, they get a hepatitis A injection right at birth. And that's, to me, insane. I don't know. I don't get it.
What's the point? They're not going to travel.
Well, they're not going to be exposed to dirty needles like drugs or sexual transmission. So I don't get that. So I'm not anti-vaccine, but I'm definitely not pro-vaccine. So some kids do fine that get vaccinated. So you can't point at vaccines as a cause of all problems. So what's interesting, though, is when I was just graduated from college, I went to the University of Minnesota to hear a lecture by a very famous vaccine specialist from New Zealand. And I went up and asked her afterwards, I said, so you have kids? She said, yeah, I've got 3 kids. I said, so are they getting vaccinated? She says, God, no, I wouldn't do that. Yeah.
Cheers, though.
So-
The way our system's set up in our country, if they're not vaccinated, they can't.
They can't go
That's right, unless you have a consent form or sign a waiver. In Minnesota, you can do that. Some states you can't. So the way it's set up is you have to vaccinate your kids. That's right.
And if you don't vaccinate them, they almost force you to, don't they?
Well, they can unless you sign a form. You say no. Now, some states, that's the way it is. you're not in Minnesota, you can sign a form and say, I don't want to do it. So that's just the way it is.
Did they take the thimerosal out now for good?
Well, thimerosal is not taken out as flu shot. If you're doing a individual flu shot where one vial for one person, there's no thimerosal. But most multi-shot where they line up in a row, like at clinics, they jab you, that has thimerosal mercury in it.
Would you get a flu shot?
God, no, I will never get a flu shot. No. Actually, the studies, here's the reason why, and I'm a science guy. In 2008, there's a group of scientists called the Cochrane Collaboration. These are independent scientists who are not paid by drug companies, by universities. They're just looking at the pure science. What do the facts say? And they published this in a medical journal called the Cochrane Journal. And many scientists and groups such as Center for Disease Control, they often quote the Cochrane Group. Well, the Cochrane Group says this, because what they do is they look at all the research, and they find the best studies, and they look at that, and then they do what's called a meta-analysis. They kind of go, okay, let's look at all these studies, and then let's write a report about it. What do the actual facts show when you actually separate the chaff from the wheat kind of thing? Well, it turns out that when they did the flu shot, they found that the results were no better than placebo, period. Now, except for in very old individuals, like seniors, like above 80, and maybe young babies who really had vulnerable immune systems where they're very sick, then they might have had some benefit. Other than that, the average person had no better than placebo. Well, when that came out, the CDC went ballistic. They said, oh, we don't agree with that at all. In fact, these studies here show this, this, and this. Well, what the Cochrane Group says is what the Cochrane Group says. So they look at everything from surgeries, drugs, vitamins, they look at chiropractic, they look at everything and they analyze it and say, okay, what do we know about glucosamine sulfate for knee arthritis that people take? Well, they find that it's really good for mild and early stage arthritis. It's excellent. Well, for advanced arthritis, it's marginal. They just tell the truth. So that's kind of where I come at the flu shot, is going, what does the science show? So I'm a little perturbed by the flu shot industry, as I call it, because every year, come up September, they're going to bring out the same statistics saying 36,000 people a year die from the flu shot, or from the flu. And that's why you better get your flu shot. It's very controversial. Many scientists have said, stop telling lies. This is not true, because if you look at the cause of death on many death certificates, they may say pneumonia, and they're saying, well, you got the flu at the end of your life. Well, meanwhile, you had Alzheimer's or heart disease or some other problem, and then you died of pneumonia, saying it was caused by the flu. It's a distorted stat, bottom line. So
again, it goes back to you're in control of your health. What we talked about all evening.
Exactly.
It goes a long way to taking care of the costs if you're that.
That's correct. Give you a good example. In Japan, they have done studies showing that those individuals who drink their green tea 3 to 4 cups per day, their incidence of the flu is like non-existent. So that's something they control in their daily lifestyle, whether to drink green tea or not. There's actually a yeast product that was it's used in the animal feed industry. Down in Iowa, there's a company that makes this yeast extract. And they found out, it was interesting, the insurance company came to the company and said, you know, there's a difference between the incidence of flu and loss of work and all the blue-collar workers down on the assembly line making all this yeast stuff. They don't get sick. They're not losing work days. But all you white-collar guys upstairs, you're missing work, and you know what's going on here. Well, it turns out they did further studies, double-blind, placebo-controlled studies, showing that they're getting hand-to-mouth contact, and they're inhaling these yeast spores, activating their immune system to fight off viruses and bugs. So you can actually take that product now in a pill form and actually use it as an anti-preventive kind of deal. So, you know, it's just common sense stuff when you think about things to activate your immune system, such as probiotics. Very big part of your body's immune system is your probiotic choice. But anyway, ask me one question, I'll go off.
Doc, do you use a microwave at your house?
Say again?
Do you cook food with a microwave at your house?
The answer, do I cook food with microwave? No, I took it out about 18 years ago. I took it out. What I tell people is good for boiling water in a glass material, not in a plastic material because you'll leach the plastic stuff into the water. I'm just nervous about it. The problem when you go to restaurants, you don't know if your food's been cooked in microwaves or not or reheated. You get what you get. So I'm eating microwave food probably when I go to restaurants. I have no idea. But I try to control it in my own kitchen. I find that when I cook food on the stovetop, it just tastes better. That was why I changed it, because I didn't like the taste of microwave food. I grew up with microwaves. I just didn't think that, I thought it was mushy. And
There's a lot of countries around the world that they won't even sell them. That's where I am.
Is that right? Wow.
Russia doesn't allow microwaves. At least they didn't.
Huh, interesting. There are some preliminary studies, but there hasn't been much research beyond where they found that when you microwave proteins, it spins them in the wrong way so that your body is taking what's normally our amino acids are in an L-shaped format. It moves them into an R shape, which is like backwards. Well, to me, that sounds something that's funny there. I don't know what, it just makes me nervous. So it doesn't really, we need more data to say yes or no, but that's our...
We don't have the enzymes to lock in what the other configuration.
That's right, exactly right. So as the charts go on, deaths from Alzheimer's doesn't say it's causing it, but it sure is an interesting association between Roundup and the number of deaths.
Are you seeing any correlation with the incidence of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in the rural population? I mean, I'm just
there is some research that's showing there are pockets, like in Michigan, farmers who are growing crops like apples and various fruits and vegetables that are using higher levels of certain herbicides and pesticides. They have higher rates of Parkinson's disease, so there are pockets, but we need more research to validate what you think you're seeing. And I see the correlation, but we don't have a lot of long-term studies. But yes, there's a real suspicious there about rural exposures. Mm-hmm.
My dad was perfectly healthy. He took 5 Tylenol his whole entire 71 years. And the doc, our local doc, says, "Pete, I wish I could change bodies with you." But his brain just went south, and those automatic functions that we take for granted, like eating, sleeping, and breathing, he couldn't do no more.
Right.
And the fortunate thing for us 6 kids is he took the decisions out of our hand. When he knew he was going south, he went to our family lawyer and said, "I don't want to die at home. I don't want to be intravenously fed. I don't want to be on an oxygen machine." And so, yeah.
Yep, it's a rough deal.
Yeah.
The story goes on, senile dementia, which is a form of dementia. It's very suspicious. Parkinson's disease, same thing.
Now, how do we know?
There's other reasons that cause Parkinson's.
How do we know? You're basically saying that there is a correlation here,
Right.
but we also know that it could be many other toxins that
Exactly.
be exposed to, but this is one of them.
Just one of many.
Now,
Mhm.
the other thing, if we believe that this is a correlation, this also then is a correlation to our livestock, right?
That's right. Yes, it is. So my view on these charts is it's not just Roundup that's causing this. There's other toxins. It's our lifestyle. You know, we don't know about all the electromagnetic cell phone radio. We have no idea. Things have changed in the last 20 years like we've never seen before. So there's a lot of unknowns we have. So it's all we can do is pinpoint some stuff, and that's the best we can do. But it's a good point. It's not just one chemical. Thyroid cancer, liver and bile duct cancer, deaths due to intestinal infection. That's pretty scary looking. Inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. I mean, those are almost mirror image there, almost. Peritonitis, which is inflammation of the gut lining itself, the abdominal wall. And constipation incidents, hospital discharge diagnosis. I think I have one or two more here. Irritable bowel syndrome. And rheumatoid arthritis. So as George Bernard Shaw says, no diet will remove all the fat from your body because the brain is entirely fat. Without a brain, you might look good, but all you could do is run for public office. So that's all I really have to share with you tonight. Any other questions before we wrap it up?
When you're doing that comparison, is there any, okay, like talking about the animals, now, is that actually showing up in any kind of test? You know, that there's residue from the Roundup? I mean, how is that all pictured?
Well,
Yes, it is. We did a study, right in the back there in 2012. We had a grower we worked with out here, probably 4 miles from town. He's been working with us for 8 years, no Roundup, no GMO. Neighbor right next to him, been in it ever since it came out. Cargill came down, was looking to buy a non-GMO grain. So they both Pioneer variety sampled the non-GMO and the GMO. What they found in the GMO, this is really alarming to me. They found 13 parts per million glyphosate right in the grain. But what was alarming was 200 parts per million of formaldehyde right in the grain. Now you put that through an animal and you end up with a stomach like that picture right that he showed, that Ken showed. But what was also alarming was, and Ken showed some of that data today, is the nutritional value of that feed is cut by 25 to 30%, right, at least?
Well, and some of the nutrients were, it was night and day, it was almost non-existent.
Here's that chart.
And now
That
we're
was
wasting
done
it.
by Cargill, right?
Cargill Food Science Lab.
Yep, they did it. Yeah, so it was unbiased.
So it's untainted, yeah.
Right.
Doesn't have Monsanto's fingerprints
Now,
on
I
it.
made a mistake of getting that out on the internet. And it was a nightmare. We were getting calls from all over the world.
You gotta be kidding.
They wanted access to that data.
Yeah, they did.
Is that right?
Yeah, and it scared me. It really scared me because, well, you know what Monsanto can do if they really want to come
Have you
in.
been keeping a low profile?
I mean, they can destroy it. And so we just kind of had to back off and say, no, we need to do further studies.
We had some negative comments too from that guy in Florida that always goes after Don Kuper
Yeah.
on that study.
The other thing do you think that the rate of escalation is also due to just the poor nutritional value of the foods that we're...
oh, by far, yes. The poor nutritional value is extraordinarily problematic. Very much so.
So you go to organic farmers markets?
Yes, I buy most of my fruits and vegetables and meats are all organic. I do, personally. And so the studies show that they are higher in nutritional content than non-organic. They've done side-by-side comparisons. And the biggest rap that's been, pushing people away from it is cost, because they're charging more for organic than non-organic. There are some newer studies showing, though, that if you do it right and you can actually buy organic foods that still not break the bank. There's some new consumer studies that just came out, but that's the downside, is they are charging more.
The way I look at it, if I have a better quality of life, if I feel more energetic,
And you're not going to the hospital.
and and I'm not going to the emergency room, you want an emergency room, what's that cost you?
There you go.
Big chunk of change.
See, and so if I spend $50, $60, $100, even a month,
That's small in
it's
comparison
small in comparison to
to the downside.
the downside, yeah.
What's your view on sprouted greens, seeds, sprouted seeds as a nutritional source?
Sprouted seeds has a higher nutritional level of enzymes and content.
That one way you can help you digest is just
A little bit. It may help you digest a little bit better. I wouldn't say it's like dramatic, but it's better than not. Grains, it doesn't. If it's gluten, it doesn't matter what you sprout or not. It's just gluten.
Like alfalfa sprouts, bean sprouts.
Yeah.
Sprouts, those.
Yeah, I think it's a good choice. I started eating those when I was probably 16 years of age, way back. I had a brother that was a health nut, so I kind of had no choice. But I didn't necessarily like them. But there was some great nutritional value. I've read a lot of research on it. But the problem is most people don't want to take the time to sprout their seeds and stuff. It takes time. They just want to go to the store and buy it and consume it.
How many kids do you have then?
What's that?
How many kids do you have?
I don't have any children, no. So I counsel a lot of parents every day, and they try to, what's fast, what's easy, and, short of fast food, what can we do to make it better? So one of the best, I'd say, solutions if you haven't done this is to get a blender machine like a Vitamix or Ninja or something to make smoothies with your fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds, like nut butters and kale and a little bit of berries, and throw some protein powder. And it's a great way to get your vegetables and fruits in without cooking, for hours. And some people just want to cook. So it's a nice way to concentrate your dietary fiber as well. But those are all good questions.
Well, with all these studies and all those graphs, are anybody actually doing any long-term studies now?
On Roundup?
Yeah.
Not that I know of. No. In fact, I was in San Diego last August doing a nutritional conference, and one of the main speakers was a naturopath or a doctor of medicine from Illinois, and he's been going around the country speaking about the negative effects of GMO.
Well, we don't know his name.
Dr. Arden Anderson, and he was talking before our group, and he kind of looked around and he goes, "Well, I don't see anybody following me around today at all." He's like, I swear they're following me around the country, looking to see what I have to say. And he wasn't paranoid. He was just like, yeah, I know they're following, watching what I'm saying out here. And he went through all the research of what they're doing in Europe as far as liquefied intestines and long-term studies on animals, and it's just scary. But not in humans, no. That's not happening in this country. In fact, he told us we do not have the ability as doctors to test your blood or urine or any body specimen to see if you have glyphosate residue in your body. Monsanto and the boys have taken it away. They've got it wrapped up. So right now, I've tried to recently, a company in Canada has a really long list of things I could test in people's blood and urine, and one of them was glyphosate. So I was right, Johnny on the spot, and said, "Whoa, great! I got a place where I can send my patient's blood and see what's going on." She turned right around and said, "Sorry, this is for research only, and we're not equipped for doing your patients. We're not ready to do that. We don't know." And I tried to quiz her, but she wouldn't talk to me about it. I think they're just being intimidated by various companies.
Is there a test? Do they do it in Europe?
In Europe, they are doing testing, yes. So I've had patients fly to England and go to a clinic and get it tested there.
But you can't send a sample?
No. Well, not that I know of. Yep.
It's illegal to send a sample blood over that test?
Well, I don't know if it's illegal, but it's really difficult. So I'm not sure. I don't have that connection yet.
It's blood?
No, I think it's just not. I don't know if there's any reasons why I couldn't. I have a patient, or a friend of mine, he's a doctor in Colorado. He sent his patient, money was not an issue, he actually flew to London and then went from there to Amsterdam to actually have his system tested for that reason. Because he was convinced he was a farmer, he was fully exposed. So his levels came back really high. But we can't test people here. There we go, Food Plague by Dr. Arden Anderson. Very good book. Yep, good book.
So, and then that's you detox that guy.
Yes. Yeah, what we do is there's ways to detoxify the system from any kind of chemicals. It's all new because we don't have the science to show us how to do it, so we have to go upon our current science, how to pull pesticides and herbicides, but we don't have any good science on glyphosate, how to pull it out, other than make sure we give sufficient minerals. We know that minerals are really important to make sure these enzymes work better. And the minerals is really what we think is the kind of the crux of the
What I don't
glyphosate.
understand is how anybody working for these companies, they've got to know this stuff. How morally.
Well,
They have families too. It's just hard for me to comprehend.
it is, I know.
Their money is more important.
What, I've heard theorists, talk about, I don't know what they call them, the chem streams in the air.
Chemtrails, yeah. Uh-huh.
Is that true?
I don't know. I don't know if they're true or not.
I was curious on that too.
I'm not an expert on that.
Down there. That one guy claims they've run into a lot of problems. Because that's been the only military expedition ever in Antarctica. They lost a couple ships.
In regard to what?
They claim to run into UFOs there.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes.
You treat autistic patients.
Yes, I do. I treat autism. Yeah. Well, I can treat all ages, whether they're young. Basically, if they're over, if they're under age 18 months or more difficult, because sometimes they're easier because you can manipulate their diet and they don't have any control. The biggest challenge are teenagers. They're like trying to push a bull into a corner. They're tough because they don't want to stop their favorite foods. I've actually consulted with various institutions that have institutionalized autistic kids. It's a no-win because Monday night is spaghetti night, Tuesday night is pizza night, and when you're talking gluten and dairy, it's a lost cause. But there's really no age limit per se on with that condition. But it's a challenging condition. It's not an easy overnight process. It takes at least a year of therapy, but we often see big changes in the first 6 months. And we see, gradual improvements right away. So it's encouraging. So, well, thank you for listening to me today, and it's been wonderful to talk to you, so thanks.
If you're interested, he's got cards here, and so if you're interested, get those.